a millionaire found an abandoned boy with a note at his door. What he discovered left him in tears. Thunder cracked across the Manhattan skyline as David Lawrence stood frozen at his mansion's garden gate. Through the torrential rain, his security lights illuminated a small figure curled beneath his prized oak tree. His heart stopped. The boy couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, dark hair plastered to his pale face, clothes soaked through. Beside him lay a weathered wooden box, its contents partially scattered across the wet grass. Among them, something caught David's eye, a rain-soaked letter and a photograph he'd tried to forget for 10 years. "Sir, please stay back," his security chief Marcus whispered urgently, hand hovering near his concealed weapon. "We don't know if this is a setup." But David was already moving forward, designer shoes sinking into the muddy grass. The photograph in his trembling hands was the one he'd given Sarah Mitchell the night she disappeared from his life. The night he'd chosen his ambition over their future. Now here it was, soaked but undeniable, connecting him to an unconscious child who might hold answers to questions he'd been afraid to ask for a decade. As he knelt beside the boy, the security lights cast harsh shadows across features that made his breath catch. Even in unconsciousness, the child's face bore an unmistakable resemblance that shook David to his core. Sarah's delicate nose, her gentle curve of cheeks. The same dark lashes resting against pale skin. Lightning flashed again, illuminating an engraving on the wooden box SM Sarah Mitchell's initials. Inside, he glimpsed more photographs, letters, and what appeared to be a worn journal. But it was the first line of the rain-smeared letter that made his world stop spinning. "Dear David, by the time you read this..." The boy stirred slightly, one small hand clutching what looked like a worn teddy bear. Without hesitation, David gathered him into his arms, surprised at how light he felt, how fragile. Through the sound of approaching sirens and Marcus calling for medical support, David couldn't tear his gaze from the child's face, a face that held echoes of the greatest mistake of his life. As he carried the boy toward the warmth of the mansion, David Lawrence, the man who controlled billions with a single word, found himself facing a decision that no amount of money could simplify. David Lawrence's empire stretched across Manhattan's skyline, each gleaming tower a testament to his ruthless pursuit of success. At 45, Forbes listed him among New York's most eligible bachelors, but his 15,000-square-foot Upper East Side mansion echoed with an emptiness that no amount of wealth could fill. His morning routine was a masterpiece of efficiency minus 5 a.m. workouts in his private gym, breakfast prepared by his personal chef, and in the office by 7 a.m. sharp. His Bentley would glide through city streets while he reviewed overnight market movements. Everything controlled, everything predictable, everything hollow. The Wall Street Journal called him the Oracle of Madison Avenue, but behind closed doors, they whispered darker names. Lawrence the Liquidator, they called him after he dismantled a century-old family business that resisted his takeover. The old David would have worn the nickname as a badge of honor. Now it felt like another indictment. His rise through Wall Street's ranks had been meteoric. Youngest partner at Goldman Sachs at 30, founder of Lawrence Investments by 32, billionaire by 35. He'd achieved everything he'd set out to do, but the cost was etched in the lines of his face and the coldness in his eyes. The dating scene had long lost its appeal. Society mothers paraded their eligible daughters at charity galas. But David saw through their practiced smiles to the hunger beneath, not for him, but for the fortune he represented. His closest relationship was with his executive assistant, who managed his life with military precision. Every year on Sarah's birthday, he would open a bottle of her favorite wine, a simple Californian Pinot Noir they'd discovered on their first date. He would sit in his study, staring at their old photographs, wondering how different life might have been if he'd made different choices. The engagement ring still locked in his desk drawer served as a constant reminder of what he'd sacrificed for success. His parents, before they passed, had begged him to find happiness beyond work. "Money can't hug you back," David, his mother, had said during their final conversation. But David had convinced himself that his chance at a family had left with Sarah that rainy night a decade ago. The only warmth in his life came from his secret hobby, restoring classic cars in his private garage. It was something he and his father used to do, and the smell of motor oil and leather brought back memories of simpler times. The newspapers never caught wind of how the mighty David Lawrence spent his weekends covered in grease, bringing old machines back to life. Board meetings that once energized him now felt like elaborate theaters of deception. His reputation for being ruthlessly decisive had evolved into something darker. Even Patricia, his CFO of 15 years, dared to suggest he was letting personal issues cloud his judgment on major acquisitions. She was right, of course, but truth had become an unwelcome guest in David's world. His wealth attracted parasites, gold diggers, con artists, long-lost relatives, all seeking a piece of the Lawrence fortune. His legal team handled them efficiently, but each attempt reinforced his isolation. The charity galas he was obligated to attend became exercises in avoiding matchmaking society mothers and their eligible daughters. The media painted a picture of success that felt like a funhouse mirror reflection. Business Insider praised his laser focus on profitability. None of them saw him drinking alone in his study, scrolling through old emails from Sarah that he couldn't bring himself to delete. Recent board meetings had become battlegrounds. Shareholders worried about his increasing focus on non-profitable ventures, particularly his insistence on maintaining struggling companies in low-income areas. They didn't understand that every time he saved a family business, he imagined he was somehow making amends to Sarah, who had always fought for the underdog. In the depths of night, when the city lights blurred through his floor-to-ceiling windows, David Lawrence, the man who had everything money could buy, faced the truth he'd been running from. Success built on sacrifice was no success at all. Sarah Mitchell was everything the corporate world wasn't: compassionate, genuine, and more concerned with changing lives than profit margins. She'd met David at Columbia Business School. Her scholarship earned seat a stark contrast to his family's legacy admission. While classmates competed for Wall Street internships, Sarah spent weekends volunteering at inner-city youth centers. Their love story had begun in the university library at midnight. She found him struggling with an ethics paper, his designer watch and perfectly pressed shirt at odds with his frustrated expression. "The answer isn't in your Bloomberg terminal," she teased, sliding over her own well-worn copy of Rawls' A Theory of Justice. By dawn, they'd planned their first date. For 3 years, they built a life together in a modest apartment in Chelsea. Sarah worked at Hope Harbor, a non-profit helping underprivileged children, while David climbed the corporate ladder. Their home was a clash of worlds: her handmade quilts and rescued plant collection meeting his rare first editions and imported espresso machine. Somehow it worked. She softened his edges, he helped her dream bigger. Every Sunday they'd walk through Central Park, planning their future. Sarah would point out young families, her eyes lighting up as she described the children they'd have. David would squeeze her hand, promising soon. While his mind calculated the next deal, the next promotion, the next milestone on his path to success. Sarah's colleagues at Hope Harbor adored her. She had a gift for seeing potential in the most troubled kids, much like she saw past David's ambitious facade to the caring man beneath. Her grant proposals were legendary in non-profit circles, passionate arguments for investing in human potential rather than just financial returns. Few knew that Sarah wrote poetry in secret, filling journals with verses about love, hope, and the price of dreams. She'd leave little notes in David's briefcase, quotes about compassion tucked between his merger documents, gentle reminders of life beyond the bottom line. He kept everyone, though she never knew. The breaking point came gradually, then all at once. Sarah's hints about starting a family became earnest discussions, then heated arguments. David wanted to wait until he made partner, until the firm was established, until. Life doesn't wait for the perfect portfolio, she'd finally said, tears streaming down her face. Their last night together, David was consumed by a crucial merger deal. Sarah tried one more time to reach him, standing in his home office doorway with news that would change everything. But his phone rang. Hong Kong was on the line and he held up a hand, mouthing 5 minutes. When he finally looked up hours later, she was gone. The police found nothing. Her apartment key and a note on his desk, "Some choices can't be undone." Her phone was disconnected. Her small savings withdrawn. The security camera showed her leaving at midnight, carrying only her favorite leather messenger bag. She'd vanished as completely as if she'd never existed. Hope Harbor received her resignation by email. Her colleagues were stunned. Sarah would never abandon her kids without saying goodbye. Something was wrong, but no one could piece it together. The children she worked with made missing posters, covering the neighborhood with crayon drawings of her smile. The last confirmed sighting was at Grand Central Station the morning after she left. A barista remembered her ordering chamomile tea, her hands shaking so badly she'd spilled it. She sat at a corner table writing in her journal, occasionally wiping tears away. By the time police checked the security footage, the trail was cold. What no one knew then was that Sarah had been protecting more than a broken heart. Her messenger bag contained evidence of corporate corruption she'd uncovered while reviewing Hope Harbor's donors' documents that implicated several board members at David's firm. She'd tried to warn him that night, to show him how his pursuit of success was blinding him to the human cost. But 5 minutes never came. The Sarah Mitchell who disappeared that night took with her not just her belongings, but the possibility of redemption David didn't yet know he needed. 10 years later, her absence still haunted the halls of Hope Harbor, where a scholarship in her name helped underprivileged children attend college funded anonymously by a donor who signed each check with a single initial D. Ethan Mitchell Lawrence grew up carrying pieces of a puzzle he couldn't solve. At 7 years old, his memories were a patchwork of foster homes, each one temporary, each move explained with gentle words about finding the right fit. But he kept every newspaper clipping featuring David Lawrence carefully hidden in a worn copy of The Little Prince, his mother's final gift. In his earliest memories, he was in a small Chicago apartment with his mother. He remembered her voice, always warm despite her exhaustion, reading bedtime stories and telling him tales about his father. "He builds amazing things," she'd say, tracing his face with a trembling hand. "And you have his determined chin, his thoughtful eyes." She never spoke of David with bitterness, only a profound sadness that Ethan was too young to understand. The Anderson family in Connecticut had been his home for the past 3 years. They were kind, patient people who never pressed him about his past. Mrs. Anderson taught him to play chess. Mr. Anderson showed him how to fix old radios. But Ethan noticed how they exchanged worried glances when he spent hours at the library, searching newspaper archives for mentions of Lawrence investments. His mother's illness remained a blur of hospital corridors and whispered conversations. He remembered her growing thinner, paler, but never losing her gentle smile. Even in her final days, she'd maintained a quiet strength, writing constantly in her journals and preparing what she called his legacy box, the wooden container that would later lead him to his father's door. At school, Ethan showed a remarkable aptitude for mathematics and an unexpected talent for repairing things, traits that made his teachers exchange knowing looks. His projects often centered around business concepts, drawing inspiration from articles about Lawrence Investments' latest ventures. When asked about his interest in finance, he'd simply shrug, but his eyes held a determination beyond his years. The other foster children called him the professor for his serious demeanor and careful speech patterns. He preferred books to playground games, often reading about corporate structures and investment strategies far beyond his grade level. But late at night, he'd clutch his worn teddy bear, the one with love, Mom stitched on its foot, and allow himself to be simply a boy missing his mother. His health had always been delicate, a condition that restricted his physical activities but seemed to sharpen his mind. regular hospital visits became opportunities for observation and learning. He memorized medical terms, studied hospital organizational charts, and quietly noted how money and influence affected patient care. Even at 7, he understood that wealth could mean the difference between life and death. The decision to find David Lawrence wasn't spontaneous. For months, Ethan had methodically gathered information, mapping his father's routines through society page photographs and business news. He'd overheard Mrs. Anderson discussing his mother's will with social workers' documents that had mysteriously vanished from court records. The mention of corporate interference sparked his first real investigation. In his small bedroom, beneath model airplanes and star charts, Ethan maintained a detailed notebook. Newspaper clippings, photographs, and carefully copied quotes created a timeline of his father's life. He noted patterns: David's annual donations to children's charities, his unexpected support of struggling family businesses, his solitary appearances at events where other executives brought families. His mother's journals, discovered in the legacy box, revealed a love story that transcended the simplistic narrative of abandonment. Sarah's words painted a portrait of a complex man torn between ambition and emotion, capable of both great achievement and profound regret. Ethan studied these passages like sacred texts, searching for the father his mother had loved. The heart condition that would later bring crisis was already making itself known: shortness of breath, unexpected fatigue. But Ethan kept these symptoms to himself, focusing instead on his mission. The same quiet determination that helped him endure countless transitions now drove him toward the one person who might have answers. On the night he appeared at David's mansion, Ethan carried more than just his mother's box and photographs. He carried the weight of two legacies: Sarah's compassion and David's drive, combined in a child wise beyond his years. His presence would force a reckoning 10 years in the making, bridging worlds his parents had once thought irreconcilable. Jennifer Parker, David's former executive assistant, wore her ambition like expensive perfume, subtle but unmistakable. Rising from assistant to vice president of operations at Lawrence Investments, she'd built her career on an uncanny ability to protect David from distractions. Her designer suits and perfectly manicured nails masked a ruthlessness that would eventually unravel 10 years of deception. Every intercepted letter from Sarah, every blocked call, was meticulously documented in a private diary, her insurance policy against an uncertain future. Mrs. Reynolds, the housekeeper who had served the Lawrence household for 15 years, carried her guilt like a heavy shawl. She'd witnessed Sarah's attempts to reach David, seen the pregnancy test in the bathroom trash, but chosen security over truth. Each morning, as she laid out David's perfectly pressed shirts, she thought of the child somewhere in the world who shared his blood. Her silent complicity manifested in small acts of penance, donating to children's charities, keeping Sarah's favorite flowers fresh in the garden, preserving the little things that might someday matter. Detective Karen Martinez brought 20 years of experience and a deep-seated skepticism to Sarah's case. The disappearance had nagged at her professional instincts: too neat, too complete. She'd kept the file open, tracking David's rising success against Sarah's vanishing trail. Her worn notebook contained a decade of observations: corporate donations to specific charities, pattern changes in Lawrence's behavior, unexplained financial transactions. Martinez recognized the shadow of guilt in David's eyes because she carried her own. She'd once dismissed Sarah's attempts to report corporate irregularities as personal drama. Dr. Emily Richardson, head of pediatrics at Mount Sinai, bridged past and present with devastating clarity. She treated Sarah during her final months, bound by patient confidentiality even as she watched David attend board meetings in the same hospital. Now, facing Ethan's identical symptoms, she carried the weight of medical knowledge that could have changed everything. Her staff whispered about her obsession with the case, the late nights spent reviewing genetic markers, the quiet tears when comparing mother and son's charts. Patricia Chen, Lawrence Investments CFO, represented the moral compass David had misplaced. Her 15-year tenure gave her the unique courage to challenge him, to question decisions that prioritize profit over people. She'd been the only executive to oppose the policy of protecting rising stars from personal complications. Now, watching David's transformation through Ethan, she methodically gathered evidence of past corporate interference, preparing for the reckoning she knew must come. James Wilson, David's personal attorney, straddled the line between enabler and conscience. He'd handled the original investigation into Sarah's disappearance, sensing even then that something wasn't right. His meticulous nature led him to keep records of everything, including messages and documents he'd been instructed to destroy. Each year, he'd added to a sealed file marked SM. Contingency, waiting for the day truth would demand its due. The Andersons, Ethan's last foster family, brought unexpected depth to the story. Their modest Connecticut home had provided more than shelter. It offered Ethan a glimpse of genuine family love. Martha Anderson's elementary school teacher's salary and Robert Anderson's small radio repair shop meant they couldn't offer luxury, but their devotion to Ethan was priceless. They'd supported his quest to understand his origins, even knowing it might mean losing him. Amanda Foster from Child Services carried the frustration of a system designed to protect, but often bound by bureaucracy. She'd inherited Sarah's file as a junior caseworker and spent years trying to understand how custody documents could simply vanish. Her investigation into Ethan's case would eventually expose systemic corruption reaching into corporate boardrooms and government offices. These supporting characters formed a complex web around the central story, each carrying pieces of truth that would eventually combine to expose a decade of manipulation and missed connections. Their individual choices, some made from ambition, others from fear, and a few from genuine concern, had collectively altered the course of 3 lives. Now, as Ethan's appearance forced long-buried secrets into the light, each would face their own reckoning with truth and responsibility. The security alert disrupted David's usual evening routine at precisely 9:47 p.m. Rain pounded against the mansion's windows, each flash of lightning casting harsh shadows across his study. He'd been reviewing acquisition papers when Marcus's voice crackled through the intercom, reporting movement near the oak tree, the one Sarah had helped him plant a decade ago. David's first instinct was to ignore it. The storm had been triggering false alarms all evening, debris blown across his meticulously maintained grounds. But something about Marcus's tone made him look up from his papers. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the security lights cast an eerie glow across his garden, illuminating a scene that would change everything. The small figure lay curled beneath the oak tree, unnaturally still against the wind-swept grass. David's hands trembled as he reached for his phone. But instead of calling security as protocol demanded, he found himself walking toward the garden door. Each step across the wet lawn brought him closer to what he now recognized as a child, no more than 7 or 8 years old. "Sir, please stay back," Marcus materialized beside him, weapon at ready. "We should call the police first," but David was already kneeling in the mud, his $12,000 suit soaked through. The boy's skin was cold, but a pulse beat steadily at his neck. Dark hair plastered to pale features that struck a chord of recognition so deep it physically hurt. The weathered wooden box beside the child had spilled its contents across the wet grass. David's breath caught as he picked up a photograph partially protected by a plastic sleeve. The image was from another lifetime, himself and Sarah at Carmela's, their favorite Italian restaurant in the West Village. She was laughing at something he'd said, dark curls cascading over her shoulders. He remembered the moment perfectly. It was the night before everything changed. A letter lay beneath the photograph, its ink running in the rain but still legible. The first line froze the blood in his veins. "Dear David, by the time you read this, Sarah's handwriting. Unchanged after 10 years, elegant even in obvious haste." The date at the top revealed a truth that shattered his world. It had been written just days before her death. Mrs. Reynolds appeared at the mansion's door, arms full of towels, her usual professional distance cracking at the sight before her. "Mr. Lawrence," she called, voice trembling. "The guest room is ready, and I've called Dr. Richardson." She paused, looking at the boy with a mixture of recognition and guilt. She says she's coming personally. David gathered the child in his arms, surprised at how light he felt. The boy's head lolled against his chest, one small hand still clutching a worn teddy bear. Through the sound of approaching sirens and the continued storm, David noticed details that pieced together a story he'd been avoiding for a decade: the medical alert bracelet on the boy's wrist, the familiar curve of his cheeks, the determined set of his jaw, even in unconsciousness. The mansion burst into controlled chaos. Staff moved with practiced efficiency, preparing the guest room, coordinating with emergency services, managing the gathering media presence outside the gates. But David remained focused solely on the child in his arms, each step up the grand staircase feeling like a journey through time. Detective Martinez arrived before the ambulance, her weathered notebook already open. She took in the scene with sharp eyes, the scattered contents of the box now carefully gathered, the boy being attended to by Mrs. Reynolds, David standing soaked and shell-shocked in the center of it all. "Mr. Lawrence," she began, her tone professional but touched with an understanding that came from 10 years of following Sarah's case. "We're going to need to ask some questions." The boy stirred slightly as Dr. Richardson rushed in, medical bag in hand. Her face paled as she examined him, recognition flickering in her eyes. She'd been Sarah's doctor during those final months, a detail that would soon take on devastating significance. "He needs immediate medical attention," she announced, already checking vital signs. "But there's something else you need to know, Mr. Lawrence." As if on cue, the boy's eyes fluttered open. For one heart-stopping moment, he looked directly at David, and in that gaze was every answer to 10 years of questions. Sarah's eyes, filled with the same quiet determination she'd always possessed, stared back at him from a face that could have been his own childhood photo. "Dad," the boy whispered, before slipping back into unconsciousness. That single word, spoken with such certainty, shattered the careful walls David had built around his heart. In that moment, surrounded by the chaos of emergency responders, police and gathering media outside, David Lawrence, the man who had sacrificed everything for success, faced the price of his choices and the possibility of redemption he never knew he needed. By midnight, Mount Sinai Hospital's private wing had transformed into a fortress of activity. David paced the corridor outside room 742, his wet clothes replaced with clothes brought by Mrs. Reynolds, but his hair still disheveled from running his hands through it countless times. Dr. Richardson emerged from the room, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes holding a weight of knowledge. "His name is Ethan," she began, consulting her tablet. 7 years old, and Mr. Lawrence, she paused, choosing her words carefully. "He has his mother's heart condition, the same one that she didn't need to finish the sentence." David's face had already drained of color, memories of Sarah's final months flooding back with cruel clarity. Detective Martinez worked quietly in the corner of the waiting room, her phone constantly buzzing with updates. The photograph from the wooden box was now sealed in an evidence bag, along with Sarah's letter and journal. She watched David's reactions carefully, noting how his hands trembled every time medical staff entered or exited Ethan's room. The media circus outside grew by the hour. News vans lined the hospital parking lot, their satellite dishes reaching into the night sky like mechanical trees. Billionaire's secret child scrolled across every local news channel. Patricia, David's CFO, arrived despite the late hour, immediately taking control of the press situation. But even her experienced handling couldn't stem the tide of speculation already flooding social media. Amanda Foster from Child Services arrived at 3 a.m., her sensible shoes squeaking on the polished floor. "Mr. Lawrence," she began, flipping through her files, "we have some concerns about the circumstances." But David's attention was fixed through the window of Ethan's room, watching the steady rise and fall of his son's chest, monitored by countless machines. By dawn, the hospital corridor had become a makeshift command center. James Wilson, David's attorney, set up camp in a corner, foam constantly at his ear. "The board is calling an emergency meeting," he reported grimly. The stock's already down 15% in pre-market trading. David barely registered the words. For the first time in his career, market movements seemed utterly meaningless. Dr. Richardson's morning rounds brought both relief and concern. "He's stable," she reported, "but we need to run more tests." The genetic markers, she hesitated, glancing at her charts. "They're identical to Sarah's case. We need to act faster than we did with her." The implication hung heavy in the air. They had a chance to save the son that they couldn't save the mother. The Andersons arrived from Connecticut around 8 a.m., their modest station wagon a stark contrast to the luxury vehicles filling the hospital's private parking area. Martha Anderson burst into tears at the sight of Ethan, while Robert Anderson stood protectively nearby, his weathered hands clutching adoption papers that had been in process for months. Inside Ethan's room, the morning light revealed details David had missed in the chaos of the night. A small notebook had fallen from the boy's jacket pages, filled with carefully collected newspaper clippings about Lawrence investments, each article meticulously dated and annotated in a child's determined handwriting. The sight brought David to his knees beside the hospital bed. Detective Martinez's morning briefing added another layer of complexity. "We've traced his movements," she reported quietly. "He left the Andersons 3 days ago, took a series of buses to New York. The planning involved." She shook her head in amazement. "It's remarkable for a child his age. Almost as if someone helped him, guided him to you." By noon, the story had gone national. Sarah's family was flying in from Chicago, their initial shock turning to anger as details emerged. Social media exploded with theories and speculation. Lawrence's legacy and justice for Sarah competed for trending status. Dr. Richardson pulled David aside as the day wore on, her face grave. "There's something else you need to see," she said, leading him to her office. On her desk lay medical records, Sarah's final months at Mount Sinai. "She was here, David. In this same hospital. While you were attending board meetings upstairs, each word felt like a physical blow. She tried to reach you, but someone she trailed off, letting the implications sink in." The first 24 hours concluded with a quiet moment in Ethan's room. David sat beside the bed, holding his son's small hand, while outside his carefully constructed world continued to unravel. On the bedside table, the worn teddy bear kept watch, its ribbon collar bearing a name carefully stitched in familiar handwriting: Ethan Lawrence Mitchell. Lawrence Investments' gleaming headquarters buzzed with unprecedented tension. The emergency board meeting, hastily convened at 9 a.m., filled the 60th floor conference room with nervous energy. Thomas Reynolds, the lead director, stood at the head of the table, his usual confidence shaken as he addressed the gathering. "The company has lost $2 billion in market value overnight," he announced, gesturing to the screens showing plummeting stock charts. "And Mr. Lawrence hasn't responded to any of our calls." The board members exchanged worried glances, their collective anxiety palpable in the morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Patricia Chen, CFO, fought to maintain control of the narrative. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from major shareholders demanding explanations. CNBC was running hourly updates on the Lawrence legacy crisis, each segment driving the stock price lower. The vultures were circling, and she knew it. Carl Mitchell, a notorious corporate raider with no relation to Sarah, seized the opportunity. His team had been watching Lawrence Investments for months, waiting for any sign of weakness. "The shareholders deserve better than a CEO playing house," he declared on Bloomberg TV. "This company needs focused leadership, not family drama." The hostile takeover bid arrived by courier at 11 a.m. The terms were brutal: a below-market offer that would strip David of control while keeping him as a figurehead CEO, conditional on resolving his personal situation. The implied threat was clear: choose between your company and your newly discovered son. Inside the boardroom, loyalty crumbled quickly. Board members who had celebrated David's business genius for years now questioned his mental stability. "We have a fiduciary duty to our shareholders," argued Richard Barnes, his words carefully chosen for the meeting minutes. "Personal matters cannot be allowed to destroy decades of value creation." The corporate communications team worked overtime, but each press release felt inadequate against the tsunami of speculation. Social media amplified every development. Lawrence Investments falling trended alongside West, the billionaire's dad. The company's carefully crafted image of stability shattered under the weight of human interest. But international markets reacted with predictable panic. Asian partnerships, cultivated over years of personal relationships, began distancing themselves. European investors demanded emergency meetings. The global empire David had built was unraveling across time zones while he sat in a hospital room, holding his son's hand. Jennifer Parker, watching from her corner office at Goldman Sachs, recognized her moment had come. The secrets she'd kept for a decade suddenly held tremendous value. Carl Mitchell's team had already reached out, suggesting her insights into Lawrence's past could be worth a considerable consultation fee. By afternoon, the damage spread beyond the stock price. Major clients began invoking contract clauses that required David's personal oversight. Deals years in the making threatened to collapse. The human cost mounted as employees watched their stock options plummet in value. Retirement plans built around company stock faced devastation. Patricia made one last desperate attempt to save the company. She proposed a temporary leadership structure, begging David via text to at least make a public statement. Her voice cracked as she described the chaos engulfing their corporate family. "We're losing everything you built," she wrote. "Please just give us something to work with." The board's final ultimatum arrived at the hospital via private courier: return to full-time leadership immediately or face unanimous removal. The document was accompanied by papers requiring David to step down as Ethan's guardian, citing his inability to balance responsibilities. Carl Mitchell appeared on Bloomberg again, smugly discussing his plans for dismantling Lawrence Investments. The empire would be sold off piece by piece, its parts worth more than its whole. Decades of building would be undone in months of calculated destruction. Legal threats mounted hourly. Shareholder lawsuits were filed claiming breach of fiduciary duty. The board's lawyers prepared documents to force an emergency leadership change. Even James Wilson advised that David's position as CEO might be legally untenable. The corporate crisis team arrived at the hospital with papers requiring immediate attention. Merger agreements, client contracts, international partnerships all needed his signature or personal appearance to prevent catastrophic collapse. The weight of an empire pressed against the hospital room doors. As evening approached, Patricia sent one final message to David: "The Asian markets open in an hour. Without your intervention, we're looking at another $1 billion in losses by morning. Please, what should I tell them?" David looked at his phone, then at Ethan's sleeping face, and made a decision that would reshape his definition of value forever. He typed 2 words in response: "Tell truth." The DNA results arrived at midnight, delivered personally by Dr. Richardson to avoid any information leaks. She found David in his usual spot beside Ethan's bed, his tie loosened, jacket discarded hours ago. "It's a match," she said softly, placing the folder on the bedside table. 99.9999% probability of paternity, though David had known in his heart since first seeing Ethan's face. The scientific confirmation hit him with unexpected force. But the DNA test revealed something more troubling: genetic markers indicating the same rare heart condition that had taken Sarah's life. Dr. Richardson's voice trembled slightly as she explained the implications. "We have a chance this time," she insisted, spreading medical charts across the small hospital table. "If we start treatment immediately, we can prevent what happened to Sarah." As if orchestrated by fate, Detective Martinez chose that moment to deliver her own discoveries. The wooden box found with Ethan contained more than just photographs and letters. Hidden in a false bottom, she'd found a USB drive containing video diaries Sarah had recorded during her pregnancy. She knew she was ill before she left, Martinez explained gently. These recordings. She was leaving a trail, Mr. Lawrence. She wanted you to find them when the time was right. The first video played on Martinez's laptop showed Sarah, younger and healthier, speaking directly to camera. David, if you're watching this, it means our son has found his way to you. I hope you'll understand why I had to leave. The timestamp showed it was recorded the day after she disappeared. David watched, transfixed, as Sarah explained how she'd discovered both her pregnancy and her illness on the same day. Mrs. Reynolds appeared at the door, clutching a stack of old security logs she'd kept hidden for years. I should have told you sooner, she confessed, tears in her eyes. She came to the office multiple times that last month trying to reach you, but Miss Parker, she had strict orders about keeping personal matters away from you during the IPO. But the investigation revealed a pattern of systematic interference. Jennifer Parker hadn't just blocked Sarah's attempts to communicate, she'd orchestrated an elaborate scheme to keep them apart. Email records showed hundreds of deleted messages from Sarah to David's personal account. Phone logs documented dozens of calls that never reached his office. Sarah's letter, now carefully preserved by the police, told a heartbreaking story of attempts to share both her pregnancy and her medical condition. I tried for weeks to tell you, she'd written. But every time I came to the office, I was told you were in meetings that couldn't be interrupted. When I finally got past reception that last night, Jennifer said you'd given explicit instructions not to be disturbed by personal matters. The most devastating revelation came from Mount Sinai's archived security footage. Sarah had been receiving treatment in the same hospital where David attended board meetings. Often they'd been mere floors apart. Dr. Richardson had found records of multiple occasions where Sarah had requested her appointments be scheduled around board meeting times, hoping to accidentally encounter David in the hospital lobby. A nurse who'd cared for Sarah during her final months came forward with additional journals. She never stopped believing you'd find out eventually, the nurse explained, handing over the weathered notebooks. She made me promise to keep these safe until either you came looking for answers or your son needed to understand. The journals detailed Sarah's journey working multiple jobs to afford medical treatment while pregnant, researching experimental therapies she couldn't access without insurance, always protecting Ethan from the truth about his father's absence. She'd created an elaborate plan for Ethan to find David, timing it to coincide with her own declining health. Most shocking was the discovery of Sarah's will, mysteriously misfiled by the corporate legal team. She had legally named David as Ethan's guardian, with specific instructions about when and how their son should learn about his father. The documents had been deliberately buried, leading to years of foster care that should never have happened. As dawn approached, David sat surrounded by evidence of a decade of manipulation and missed connections. Sarah's final video diary played quietly on the laptop recorded just days before her death, her face gaunt but her eyes still bright with love and hope. "Take care of our boy, David," she whispered. "And remember that some choices aren't really choices at all when love is involved." In Ethan's room, the morning sun cast long shadows across medical equipment and scattered evidence of a truth too long hidden. The boy slept peacefully, unaware that his carefully planned journey to find his father had unleashed a cascade of revelations that would change everything. David watched his son's chest rise and fall, each breath a reminder of the precious second chance he'd been given and the price that had been paid to make it possible. The crisis struck without warning during what should have been a routine morning. David was attempting to make pancakes, his first time cooking in decades, trying to create some sense of normalcy in their hospital room routine. Ethan had been watching with amused interest, offering commentary on his father's culinary struggles, when suddenly his small hand clutched his chest. "Dad," he whispered, face draining of color. The word still felt new on his lips, but the fear in his eyes was ancient. The plate of half-burned pancakes crashed to the floor, as David lunged forward, catching his son as he collapsed. The monitors erupted in a cacophony of alarms, each beep echoing the terror in David's heart. Dr. Richardson burst into the room with her team, their movements swift and practiced. His heart showing signs of rejection, she announced, voice tight with professional control. "We need to move him to ICU immediately." The words hit David like physical blows, the same words that had preceded Sarah's final decline. The next hours became a blur of medical terminology and barely contained panic. Ethan's condition deteriorated rapidly, his small body fighting a battle that had claimed his mother's life. David paced the ICU waiting room, his expensive shoes wearing paths in the linoleum, while doctors debated treatment options in hushed tones. "There's an experimental treatment," Dr. Richardson finally said, her face drawn with exhaustion. "But it's not yet approved by insurance," and the cost. She hesitated, knowing David's financial empire was crumbling. "We're looking at several $1 million, with no guarantee of success." The board's ultimatum arrived with cruel timing, a final deadline to return to work or lose everything. Carl Mitchell's hostile takeover bid had gained momentum, threatening to dismantle Lawrence Investments piece by piece. Patricia's urgent messages detailed the collapse of stock prices, the flight of investors, the imminent destruction of everything David had spent his life building. In Ethan's ICU room, machines beeped in steady rhythm, measuring out precious moments of life. The boy's face, so like Sarah's in repose, showed signs of the same fierce determination to survive. David found himself speaking to his unconscious son, making promises he wasn't sure he could keep, but knowing with absolute certainty that nothing, no amount of money or power mattered more than keeping Ethan alive. The experimental treatment required immediate payment, no payment plans, no corporate guarantees accepted. David's personal accounts, heavily invested in his company's plummeting stock, couldn't cover the full amount. The board had frozen his corporate assets pending the leadership crisis. His art collection, worth millions, would take too long to liquidate. Mrs. Reynolds appeared with a solution that brought him to tears. The house staff, from security guards to gardeners, had taken up a collection. "We remember Miss Sarah," the housekeeper said simply, placing an envelope of cash on the table. "She always treated us like family. Now it's our turn." The treatment began at midnight, a race against time and probability. Dr. Richardson supervised personally, her dedication to saving Ethan perhaps driven by the memory of failing to save his mother. Each hour brought new challenges, new decisions, new moments of heart-stopping fear when monitors showed concerning readings. Detective Martinez maintained a quiet vigil outside the ICU, her investigation temporarily suspended but her presence offering silent support. She'd seen enough of life's cruelties to recognize the poetry of this moment. A father who had once chosen wealth over family, now willing to sacrifice everything for his son. The Andersons arrived with Ethan's favorite books and his worn teddy bear, their legal claim to custody forgotten in the face of such crisis. Martha Anderson took one look at David's haggard face and did something remarkable. She hugged him. "He's strong," she whispered, "just like his mother." Day blurred into night as the treatment continued. David refused to leave Ethan's side, learning to read the monitors, anticipating the nurses' routines, becoming an expert in his son's care. The business empire he'd built continued to crumble, but for the first time in his life, David Lawrence had found something worth losing everything for. A week into treatment, during the darkest hour of night, Ethan opened his eyes. "Did you really make pancakes?" he asked weakly, his first words since the crisis began. David laughed through his tears, clasping his son's small hand. In that moment, watching the color slowly return to Ethan's face, he understood what Sarah had known all along, that love, not wealth, was the true measure of a man's worth. The truth exploded across national media with the force of a bomb. Jennifer Parker, appearing on CNN in a carefully orchestrated interview, revealed a decade of corporate manipulation that had separated a family and ultimately cost Sarah Mitchell her life. Her designer suit and perfect makeup couldn't mask the tremor in her voice as she detailed the systematic destruction of Sarah's attempts to reach David. "It wasn't just me," she confessed, her practiced composure cracking. "There was a whole protocol in place. We called it Project Shield, protecting rising executives from personal distractions that might derail their careers." The documents she provided painted a damning picture: intercepted letters, blocked calls, security personnel instructed to deny Sarah access, even surveillance of her movements. The corporate conspiracy reached higher than anyone had imagined. Board members had not only known about Sarah's pregnancy but had actively participated in keeping the information from David. Meeting minutes revealed discussions about the Mitchell situation and the potential impact on the company's upcoming IPO. They had calculated the cost of a human life against quarterly profits and chosen their balance sheets. Thomas Reynolds, the board chairman, resigned in disgrace after emails surfaced showing his direct orders to handle the Sarah Mitchell problem permanently. The carefully crafted press release announcing his departure couldn't hide the ugly truth: he had personally ensured that Sarah's medical records never reached David, even as her condition worsened. Patricia Chen, whose own suspicions had been growing for years, finally uncovered the smoking gun in the company's archive servers. A dedicated email account, shield@lawrenceinvest.com, had coordinated the entire operation. Hundreds of messages detailed the systematic destruction of every attempt Sarah made to contact David, including her final desperate visit to his office the night before she disappeared. The corporate legal team's involvement proved especially damning. They had deliberately misfiled Sarah's will, which had named David as Ethan's guardian. Years of foster care could have been avoided if a single document hadn't been buried beneath layers of corporate bureaucracy. James Wilson, reviewing the evidence, found his own signature on papers he had no memory of signing. His drink had been spiked at a board meeting where these documents were slipped into routine paperwork. Security footage from the company's archives, thought to have been destroyed, showed Sarah's final attempt to reach David. 8 months pregnant, visibly ill, she had made it all the way to his office floor, only to be surrounded by security personnel and escorted out. The timestamp showed David had been in a meeting just 30 feet away, unaware that his life was being manipulated by those he trusted most. The revelation that hit David hardest came from his former secretary. She had kept a diary documenting every time Sarah had called or visited. "Mr. Lawrence is in a meeting" became a mantra, repeated so often she had started noting the real locations in her journal: having lunch with investors. Or actually in his office. Looking at Sarah's picture, the small, leather-bound book provided a day-by-day account of missed connections and orchestrated separations. Carl Mitchell's hostile takeover attempt collapsed when evidence emerged linking him to the original conspiracy. He had been on the board of a competing firm that stood to benefit from keeping David focused solely on business. His recent attacks on David's leadership were revealed as the final play in a decade-long strategy to destroy both the man and his company. The corporate betrayal had tentacles reaching into every level of the organization. HR had created false harassment complaints to justify banning Sarah from the building. The IT department had developed sophisticated email filters to ensure her messages never reached David's inbox. Even the company's charitable foundation had been instructed to reject grant applications from Sarah's non-profit organization. As each layer of deception was exposed, David's transformation from corporate titan to devoted father gained public sympathy. The same business media that had criticized his absence now praised his humanity. The stock price, which had been plummeting, stabilized as investors recognized the story's potential for positive rebranding. Jennifer Parker's final revelation proved the most shocking. She had kept Sarah's last letter, written the night before she disappeared. "I don't believe David knows Sarah had written. He has too much good in his heart to allow this. Someday, when our child is old enough to understand, I hope he learns that his father was a victim of his own success, surrounded by people who thought they were protecting him, but were really just destroying what mattered most. The exposure of corporate betrayal became a watershed moment in business ethics. Lawrence Investments, under David's renewed leadership, would later become a model for corporate responsibility, with explicit policies protecting employees' personal lives. The Sarah Mitchell Protocol would be adopted by companies worldwide, ensuring that no other family would be torn apart by corporate ambition. The family court hearing room buzzed with tension as three families battled for custody of one small boy. David sat at one table with his attorneys, tie perfectly knotted despite sleepless nights at Ethan's bedside. The Andersons occupied another table, their modest clothing a stark contrast to the expensive suits surrounding them. Sarah's parents, the Mitchells, filled the third position, their faces lined with a decade of grief and renewed hope. Amanda Foster stood before Judge Eleanor Harrison, her presentation methodical and thorough. Your Honor, this case represents an unprecedented situation. We have three viable custody claims: a biological father who was deliberately kept unaware of his son's existence, foster parents who have provided stable care for 3 years, and maternal grandparents with a strong biological claim. The media presence outside the courthouse had reached circus proportions. "Billion-dollar baby" screamed the tabloid headlines, while more respectable publications debated the ethics of wealth versus stability in custody decisions. Every day, Ethan's hospital room received hundreds of letters from well-wishers and strangers offering opinions on where he belonged. Martha Anderson's testimony brought tears to many eyes. "We love Ethan," she said simply, her teacher's salary and her husband's small repair shop somehow seeming more valuable than David's billions in this context. "We were there for his nightmares, his first day of school, every scraped knee and triumph. We may not be wealthy, but we gave him a real home." The Mitchells' testimony carried the weight of loss and redemption. "We lost our daughter without ever knowing our grandson existed," Tom Mitchell's voice cracked. "Now we find out that corporate greed stole 10 years of family connections from us. We're his only link to Sarah, to understanding who his mother was." David's testimony challenged public perception of the ruthless businessman. He spoke of learning to be a father in hospital rooms, of discovering Sarah's journals, of trying to make pancakes for the first time at 45 because his son mentioned liking them. His voice shook when describing how Ethan had called him Dad before losing consciousness that first night. Expert witnesses paraded through the courtroom. Child psychologists debated the impact of wealth versus stability. Social workers argued about the importance of biological connections. Medical experts stressed the need for consistent care given Ethan's health condition. Each perspective added another layer to an already complex situation. The breakthrough came unexpectedly through Ethan himself. Judge Harrison, known for her thorough approach, requested a private meeting with the boy in her chambers. What transpired in that conversation would change everything. Ethan, still weak from his treatment, but clear-eyed, shared his journey of discovery. "I didn't run away to find a rich father," he explained, his small voice steady. "I ran away to find the man my mom never stopped loving. She left me clues in her journals, in the stories she told. The Andersons gave me love when I needed it most, and I'll always love them for that. But Mom wanted me to know my dad, to understand that sometimes life keeps good people apart." The judge's decision acknowledged the unique circumstances of the case. The Andersons would maintain visitation rights, recognizing their vital role in Ethan's life. The Mitchells would have guaranteed time with their grandson, ensuring Sarah's memory and family history remained strong. Primary custody would go to David, with strict conditions about maintaining these family connections. But it was the families themselves who transformed the legal decision into something more meaningful. Martha Anderson, seeing David's genuine love for Ethan, offered to help him learn the practical aspects of parenting. "You need to know his favorite bedtime story," she said softly, "and how he likes his sandwiches cut." Tom and Mary Mitchell, watching David pursue the experimental treatment for Ethan's heart condition, the same treatment Sarah couldn't afford, recognized in him the love their daughter had seen years ago. They shared photos and memories, helping father and son understand the remarkable woman who connected them. David surprised everyone by purchasing a house near the Andersons in Connecticut, ensuring Ethan could maintain his school friendships and routine visits. The Mitchells were given a guest house on the property, creating an extended family compound that honored all the connections in Ethan's life. The court battle's resolution became a template for modern family law, cited in cases involving complex family structures. The Lawrence Mitchell decision. He emphasized that a child's best interests could include maintaining multiple family connections, that love wasn't limited to traditional definitions of family. The breakthrough came during a thunderstorm, 3 weeks into Ethan's hospital stay. The boy had been having trouble sleeping, the beeping monitors and unfamiliar shadows making rest elusive. David, who hadn't left the hospital room in days, noticed his son's increasing anxiety as thunder rattled the windows. "Mum used to read to me during storms," Ethan said quietly, his first voluntary mention of Sarah since the crisis began. David's heart clenched at the word mom, but he managed to keep his voice steady as he asked, "What did she read?" "The Little Prince," Ethan replied, pulling a worn copy from his backpack. The book's pages were dog-eared, its margins filled with Sarah's delicate handwriting, little notes, and observations about their son as he grew. David opened to the first page, his voice uncertain at first, but growing stronger as he read about a pilot lost in the desert and a mysterious little boy from another world. As the storm raged outside, something shifted in the sterile hospital room. Ethan began adding commentary, explaining which parts were his favorites, what his mum had said about certain passages. David discovered that Sarah had used the book to tell their story, the businessman who needed to learn what was truly important in life. The next morning brought another connection. David was attempting to fix the hospital room's television when Ethan commented on his technique. "You're holding the screwdriver wrong," he said, then demonstrated the correct grip with his small hands. Like fixing radios with Mr. Anderson, David remembered his own father teaching him about tools, and suddenly they were sharing stories about engines and repairs. Their shared love of fixing things became a bridge. David brought in broken electronics from home, and they worked on them together during Ethan's stronger moments. The nurses would find them surrounded by parts and manuals, heads bent together in concentration, the billionaire and his son looking more like a couple of mechanics in their focused determination. Food became another connection point. David learned that Ethan had inherited Sarah's sweet tooth and her inability to eat eggs that weren't completely scrambled. He studied his son's preferences with the same attention he'd once given to market trends, making notes about favorite snacks and comfort foods. Mrs. Reynolds found him in the mansion's kitchen at midnight, practicing how to make the perfect grilled cheese sandwich. The first real laugh they shared came over David's attempt at origami. Ethan had mentioned that Sarah taught him to make paper cranes for good luck, so David tried to follow a tutorial on his phone. The resulting creation looked more like a crushed paper ball than a bird, sending Ethan into fits of giggles that had the medical staff rushing in to check on them. Their conversations grew deeper during the late-night hours when sleep wouldn't come. Ethan shared memories of Sarah, her laugh, her way of humming while she cooked, how she never missed a school event, even when she was tired from work. David, in turn, told stories about meeting her in college, their first date, how she could always see the best in people. The physical therapy sessions became team efforts. When Ethan struggled with exercises, David would do them alongside him, the powerful CEO looking comically oversized on the pediatric equipment, but completely unconcerned with anything except encouraging his son. They created a scoring system, turning each session into a game with increasingly silly rewards. The hospital staff witnessed their growing bond with professional joy. Dr. Richardson noted how Ethan's vital signs improved when David was near. The physical therapists reported better cooperation during sessions where father and son worked together. But even the usually skeptical Amanda Foster softened, watching their relationship develop naturally despite the extraordinary circumstances. Their most profound connection formed through music. David discovered that Ethan had inherited Sarah's talent for piano when he caught his son picking out melodies on a tablet's virtual keyboard. The next day, a small electronic piano appeared in the hospital room. David remembered enough from childhood lessons to teach basic chords, and soon they were creating simple duets. The night Ethan finally felt strong enough to share his biggest fear became their turning point. "I was scared you wouldn't want me," he whispered into the darkness. "That you'd be like the other foster families who said I was too quiet, too serious." David gathered his son close, his own tears falling freely. "I've wanted you every day of my life," he responded. "I just didn't know it until now." Trust built between father and son in small moments, each one a bridge across 10 years of absence. The morning routine became their first shared ritual. David, who had never made breakfast in his life, learned to prepare Ethan's oatmeal exactly the way he liked it, with brown sugar melted on top and fresh berries arranged in patterns that made the boy smile. During medical procedures, they developed a secret language of hand squeezes. 1 squeeze meant "I'm scared," 2 meant "it's going to be okay," and 3 meant "I'm here, I'm not leaving." The hospital staff noticed how Ethan's anxiety levels dropped significantly when he could maintain this silent communication with his father. Their private jokes evolved naturally. David's first attempts at using the hospital's coffee machine had resulted in a minor flood, earning him the nickname "Coffee Disaster Dad" from his son. They kept a running tally of his kitchen mishaps, each new addition causing fits of laughter that proved better medicine than any prescription. Homework became another bonding point. Though still confined to the hospital, Ethan was determined not to fall behind in school. David discovered his son had inherited his head for numbers, but Sarah's creative approach to problem solving. They would spend hours working through math problems, turning each one into a story or game that made learning feel like adventure. The transformation in David was profound. The man who once commanded boardrooms with stern authority now sat cross-legged on a hospital floor, helping his son build elaborate paper airplane squadrons. His perfectly tailored suits gave way to comfortable sweaters and jeans, his polished appearance softening as his heart opened. Nighttime brought their deepest conversations. In the quiet hours when the hospital settled into its evening rhythm, Ethan would ask questions about Sarah. David learned to answer honestly, sharing both the joy of their love story and the pain of their separation. Together, they pieced together a fuller picture of the remarkable woman who connected them. Physical therapy sessions became opportunities for storytelling. As they worked through exercises together, David would share tales from his own childhood, the time he broke his arm trying to fly off the garage roof, his first attempt at fixing his father's car, the summer he spent learning to swim. Ethan responded with his own stories, carefully at first, then with growing enthusiasm. Trust showed in unexpected ways. One afternoon, during a particularly difficult blood draw, Ethan reached for David's hand without looking, a reflexive gesture of seeking comfort that brought tears to his father's eyes. The nurse later told David it was the first time she'd seen the boy accept comfort so naturally. Their shared love of mechanics provided another avenue for connection. David brought in old watches and small electronics, and together they would take them apart and rebuild them. These projects became metaphors for their own relationship, understanding how things worked, fixing what was broken, creating something new from separate parts. The hospital room walls slowly transformed, covered with Ethan's drawings and their joint projects. Mathematical equations mixed with artwork, engineering sketches beside get-well cards from the Andersons. Mrs. Reynolds commented that it was the first time she'd seen David's living space reflect actual living. Music became their evening ritual. David remembered Sarah's love for classical piano, and he hired a teacher to give Ethan lessons on the electronic keyboard in his room. Sometimes they would simply sit together, picking out simple melodies, letting the music say what words couldn't yet express. The breakthrough in their relationship came during a late-night thunderstorm. Ethan, still weak from treatment, had been having nightmares. David found himself singing an old lullaby, the same one he'd heard Sarah humming years ago. His voice was far from perfect, but Ethan's grip on his hand relaxed, and for the first time the boy fell asleep feeling completely safe. Their most powerful bond formed through shared grief. One evening, looking through Sarah's journals together, they found a pressed flower, a forget-me-not from their first date. David's voice cracked as he told the story, and Ethan leaned into him, offering comfort as much as receiving it. They were learning that healing happened better together. As weeks passed, their relationship deepened beyond the initial crisis that had brought them together. They developed inside jokes, shared gestures, and the kind of instinctive understanding that usually takes years to build. The hospital staff watched in amazement as two separate lives knit themselves into one family, bound by love, trust, and the enduring legacy of Sarah's wisdom. While David focused on rebuilding his relationship with Ethan, Lawrence Investments crumbled brick by digital brick. The stock price, once the envy of Wall Street, plummeted to historic lows. Trading had to be halted multiple times to prevent complete freefall, each pause sending shockwaves through the financial markets. Carl Mitchell's hostile takeover gained unstoppable momentum. Major shareholders, seeing their investments evaporate, began backing his bid for control. Board members who had once praised David's leadership now publicly questioned his mental stability. The empire he'd spent decades building was being dismantled in a matter of weeks. Patricia fought desperately to maintain control, but without David's personal touch, key relationships began to unravel. International partners who had dealt exclusively with him for years started exploring other options. The Asian markets, particularly sensitive to leadership uncertainty, began dumping Lawrence Investment shares in massive blocks. The human cost mounted daily. Employees watched their retirement accounts, heavily invested in company stock, shrink by the hour. The corporate headquarters, once buzzing with energy, fell quiet as people began updating their resumes. Middle managers held hushed conversations about severance packages and job prospects. David's private art collection, worth millions, was sold piece by piece to fund Ethan's experimental treatment. Each sale made headlines: Lawrence liquidates Picasso for son's care and billionaire sells empire for love. The media painted him as either a fool or a saint, with no middle ground. The business world watched in horrified fascination as one of their titans chose family over fortune. The board's final ultimatum arrived via courier to Ethan's hospital room: return immediately or face complete removal from the company. The document was accompanied by financial projections showing total collapse within months without David's intervention. His response was a single handwritten note: some things matter more than money. Carl Mitchell seized this moment to launch his most aggressive attack. He appeared on every major financial network, presenting his vision for dismantling Lawrence Investments. The company would be split into dozens of smaller entities, each sold to the highest bidder. Thousands of jobs would be restructured, decades of business relationships severed. In the corporate headquarters, loyalty crumbled like ancient mortar. Executives who had built their careers under David's leadership now scrambled to align themselves with Mitchell's team. Each defection made headlines, each betrayal another nail in the corporate coffin. The few who remained loyal faced increasing pressure to abandon ship. The most painful blow came from international markets. Partners in Asia and Europe, cultivated through years of personal relationships, began distancing themselves. Contracts that had been negotiated on handshakes and trust were suddenly being reviewed by teams of lawyers. The global empire David had built on personal connections was dissolving in a flood of corporate anxiety. Patricia made one last desperate attempt to save the company. She organized a video conference with major shareholders, trying to buy time for David's return. But without his commanding presence, without his strategic vision, the meeting devolved into a chorus of demands for immediate leadership change. The vote was unanimous: David Lawrence would be removed as CEO. The news reached David as he was helping Ethan with his math homework. His phone buzzed with messages from James Wilson, his attorney, detailing the board's decision and the legal implications. Ethan, sensing his father's distress, put down his pencil and took David's hand. "Is it about the company?" he asked softly. "Mom always said some things are worth more than money." The financial press had a field day with the collapse. Headlines screamed Lawrence legacy lost and billion-dollar baby bankrupts. Empire market analysts who had once praised David's business acumen now questioned every decision he'd ever made. The story became a cautionary tale of letting personal emotions destroy shareholder value. In a final ironic twist, the collapse of Lawrence Investments attracted vulture investors who began buying up shares at rock-bottom prices. The very empire David had built to secure his future was being carved up and sold off piece by piece, while he sat in a hospital room reading The Little Prince to his son, finding more value in Ethan's smile than in all the wealth he'd ever accumulated. The corporate world watched in disbelief as David Lawrence, once their shining example of ruthless success, chose to let his empire fall rather than leave his son's bedside. It was a choice that would be debated in business schools for years to come. The billionaire who discovered that some things couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. Detective Martinez's investigation uncovered layers of deception that stretched far beyond simple corporate interference. Each new discovery painted a more devastating picture of orchestrated separation, with Sarah's attempts to reach David blocked at every turn by an elaborate network of conspirators. The security footage told a heartbreaking story. Sarah, heavily pregnant and clearly ill, had made 17 attempts to reach David's office in the month before she disappeared. Each time, she was intercepted and turned away. The most damning clip showed her final visit. She had made it all the way to David's floor, only to be surrounded by security guards while he sat unknowing in a meeting just 30 feet away. Hospital records revealed an even crueler truth. Sarah had received treatment at Mount Sinai during the same periods when David attended board meetings in the building. Dr. Richardson discovered multiple instances where they had nearly crossed paths, Sarah leaving her oncology appointments just minutes before David arrived for his meetings. The hospital staff had been instructed to keep them separated, told it was for Mr. Lawrence's privacy. Jennifer Parker's personal files, seized during the investigation, contained detailed logs of every intercepted communication. Hundreds of emails, phone calls, and letters had been systematically blocked. She had maintained a separate email account specifically for coordinating what she called the Sarah situation with other executives. The level of organization was staggering: weekly reports tracking Sarah's movements, updates on her medical condition, even surveillance photos of her growing pregnancy. The most shocking discovery came from the corporate legal department's archived files. Sarah's will, naming David as Ethan's guardian, hadn't simply been misfiled, it had been deliberately buried under mountains of paperwork. Multiple lawyers had been involved in ensuring the document never reached family court, leading to years of unnecessary foster care for Ethan. Sarah's own investigation, documented in her journals, showed she had begun to uncover the conspiracy in her final months. She had methodically gathered evidence, building a case to prove the systematic interference. Her last journal entries revealed her race against time, trying to document everything for Ethan while her health rapidly declined. The financial trails proved particularly damning. Corporate funds had been used to pay for surveillance of Sarah, to bribe hospital staff for information about her condition, and to ensure her grant applications to children's charities were rejected. The paper trail led straight to the board of directors, who had authorized these expenditures under the guise of executive protection. Detective Martinez found a series of burner phones used by Jennifer Parker and other executives specifically for coordinating their efforts to keep Sarah away from David. Text messages revealed casual discussions about her deteriorating health, with one executive commenting, "Problem might solve itself soon." The callousness of these communications shocked even veteran investigators. Mrs. Reynolds proved to be an unexpected source of information. The housekeeper had kept her own detailed records, dates and times of Sarah's visits, conversations she'd overheard, changes in David's behavior. Her testimony painted a picture of a man deliberately kept in the dark about life-altering information by those he trusted most. The investigation into hospital records revealed that Sarah's experimental treatment had been denied not by insurance, but by direct intervention from Lawrence Investments board members who sat on the hospital's funding committee. They had effectively sealed her fate while maintaining plausible deniability. Sarah's friends from Hope Harbor came forward with additional evidence. They had helped her document everything, keeping copies of all attempted communications with David. One friend revealed the existence of a safety deposit box containing videos Sarah had recorded for both David and Ethan, explaining her discoveries about the corporate conspiracy. The most heartbreaking piece of evidence was found in Sarah's last letter, never delivered. David. She had written, "By the time you read this, you'll know the truth. I don't blame you for what others did in your name. Our son will need you to be the man I always knew you were, one who values love above power, family above fortune. Don't let them win by becoming what they wanted you to be." Detective Martinez's final report was damning. Dozens of people had actively participated in keeping David and Sarah apart, leading directly to her death and Ethan's years in foster care. The conspiracy had been so widespread, so methodically executed, that it painted a picture of corporate culture gone terrifyingly wrong in its pursuit of profit above human life. David's transformation from corporate titan to devoted father happened in quiet moments that no business success could rival. The man who once commanded boardrooms found himself learning to tie child-sized shoelaces, mastering the art of cutting sandwiches diagonally, because that's how Mom did it. And discovering that bedtime stories required different voices for each character. In the hospital room, surrounded by medical equipment and childhood drawings, David learned a new kind of negotiation. Instead of hostile takeovers, he negotiated with nurses for extra pudding cups. Rather than quarterly projections, he focused on Ethan's daily progress charts. The skills that had built his empire were being redirected toward building something far more precious, a relationship with his son. Ethan's growth was equally profound. The guarded, serious child who had arrived unconscious on David's doorstep began to show glimpses of Sarah's warmth. His smile, rare at first, started appearing more frequently, especially during their shared projects. He developed a habit of leaving small notes for his father, mathematical equations with hidden messages, just as Sarah used to leave notes in David's briefcase. Their shared grief for Sarah transformed into a bridge between them. Together, they created a memory wall in Ethan's hospital room, filling it with photographs and stories. David learned to talk about Sarah without his voice breaking, sharing memories that made Ethan laugh and helped them both heal. The boy, in turn, shared his own precious memories of his mother, completing pieces of the puzzle David had missed. Mrs. Reynolds watched their evolution with quiet joy. The household staff, once kept at a professional distance, became part of their extended family. The mansion's formal dining room, unused for years, filled with the sounds of Ethan's homework sessions and impromptu science experiments. David learned to ignore priceless antiques being repurposed as fort-building materials. Physical therapy sessions became lessons in perseverance for both father and son. David, who had never accepted failure in business, learned that healing had its own timeline. He celebrated Ethan's small victories 3 more steps than yesterday, 5 minutes longer at the piano, with more pride than any business achievement had ever brought him. Their emotional growth showed in unexpected ways. During a particularly difficult medical procedure, Ethan reached for David's hand without hesitation, a gesture of complete trust that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. David, who had spent years controlling his emotions in public, found himself freely showing both fear and joy, learning from his son that vulnerability could be strength. The hospital staff noted changes in both patients and father. Ethan's recovery exceeded medical expectations, boosted by the stability of his father's constant presence. David, meanwhile, developed an intuitive understanding of his son's needs, knowing when to encourage and when to simply hold him, when to distract with stories, and when to sit in compassionate silence. Their shared love of fixing things became therapeutic. David brought in broken clocks, radios, and small engines, turning the hospital room into a makeshift workshop. As they repaired each item together, they were also rebuilding their own relationship, piece by careful piece. Ethan inherited both his father's mechanical aptitude and his mother's patient determination. The most significant growth came in their ability to talk about difficult things. Ethan began asking questions about the past, about why David hadn't been there, about the corporate conspiracy that had separated their family. David learned to answer honestly but age-appropriately, helping his son understand that adult mistakes and corporate greed had caused their separation, not lack of love. Their evening routine became sacred. After therapy and homework, they would read together not just children's books, but also Sarah's journals, sharing her words and wisdom. These quiet moments allowed them to process their emotions together, building the kind of bond that no amount of money could buy. David's priorities shifted completely. Board meetings and stock prices became meaningless compared to Ethan's smile. He learned to measure success not in dollars but in moments, the first time Ethan called him Dad. Without hesitation, the first shared laugh over a failed cooking attempt, the first time they both talked about Sarah without crying. The transformation was most evident in the small moments. David, who once needed everything perfectly organized, learned to appreciate the chaos of childhood. His designer suits gave way to comfortable clothes perfect for floor puzzles and art projects. His once rigid schedule became flexible, adapting to Ethan's needs and energy levels. The crisis struck without warning during what should have been a routine morning. Ethan had been showing steady improvement, even joining David for their now traditional breakfast of slightly burnt toast and perfectly cut fruit. They were discussing plans for the day when Ethan suddenly clutched his chest, his face draining of color. "Dad," he whispered, the word barely audible. His small hand reached out, trembling, as monitors erupted in a cacophony of alarms. David caught his son as he slumped forward, memories of Sarah's final decline flashing through his mind with terrifying clarity. Dr. Richardson burst into the room with her team, their practiced efficiency masking obvious concern. His heart showing signs of rejection, she announced, her voice tight. "We need to move him to ICU immediately." The words hit David like physical blows, the same words that had preceded Sarah's final days. The ICU waiting room became David's personal purgatory. Each tick of the clock echoed like thunder. Each passing nurse's footsteps caused his heart to jump. He clutched Sarah's journal, reading her words of courage, trying to channel her strength. The business empire he'd built continued to crumble, but for the first time in his life, David Lawrence had found something worth losing everything for. Mrs. Reynolds arrived with Ethan's teddy bear, now wearing a tiny hospital gown matching its owner's. The Andersons came shortly after, bringing his favorite books and a handmade card from his former classmates. Martha Anderson took one look at David's haggard face and did something remarkable. She hugged him. "He's strong," she whispered, "just like his mother." Dr. Richardson's updates became shorter, more technical, hiding behind medical terminology what she couldn't say directly. The experimental treatment they'd been considering was now their only option, but it carried significant risks. "We'd need your consent," she explained, sliding over forms that could determine Ethan's fate. "But I must warn you, the success rate is only 30%. The treatment's cost was staggering millions of dollars, far exceeding insurance coverage. David's personal accounts, heavily invested in his crumbling company stock, couldn't cover it. The board had frozen his corporate assets pending the leadership crisis. His art collection, worth millions, would take too long to liquidate. Hospital staff watched in amazement as David Lawrence, the man who once commanded billions, sold his properties one by one. His Hampton estate, his collection of classic cars, even his beloved childhood home in Connecticut, everything went to fund Ethan's treatment. Each sale made headlines, but David never wavered in his choice. The treatment began at midnight, a race against time and probability. Dr. Richardson supervised personally, perhaps driven by the memory of failing to save Sarah. Each hour brought new challenges, new decisions, new moments of heart-stopping fear when monitors showed concerning readings. Days blurred together as David maintained his vigil. He learned to read the medical monitors, anticipating the nurses' routines, becoming an expert in his son's care. The business world he'd once dominated continued to collapse around him, but he barely noticed. His entire universe had narrowed to the steady beep of heart monitors and the rise and fall of Ethan's chest. Detective Martinez maintained a quiet presence outside the ICU, her investigation temporarily suspended but her support unwavering. She'd seen enough of life's cruelties to recognize the poetry of this moment. A father who had once chosen wealth over family, now willing to sacrifice everything for his son. A week into treatment, during the darkest hour of night, Ethan opened his eyes. "Did you save any pancakes?" he asked weakly, his first word since the crisis began. David laughed through his tears, clasping his son's small hand. In that moment, watching the color slowly return to Ethan's face, he understood what Sarah had known all along, that love, not wealth, was the true measure of a man's worth. The road to recovery would be long, but they would face it together. David learned to sleep in the uncomfortable ICU chair, his hand never leaving Ethan's. He memorized every medication, every procedure, determined not to fail his son as he had failed Sarah. The empire he'd built might be crumbling, but he was building something far more valuable: a second chance at love. The board's final ultimatum arrived at the hospital via private courier, just as Ethan's condition reached a critical point. The leather portfolio contained 2 documents, one requiring David's immediate return to full-time leadership, the other forcing him to relinquish guardianship of Ethan, citing his inability to balance responsibilities. The choice was brutally clear: his empire or his son. Patricia's voice cracked during their last phone call. "David, we're losing everything. The Asian markets are in free fall, European partners are pulling out, and Carl Mitchell's team is moving in for the kill." She paused, years of loyalty warring with corporate responsibility. "The board votes in 1 hour. Please, just give us something to work with." The numbers were staggering. Lawrence Investments had lost 40% of its value in 3 weeks. Thousands of jobs hung in the balance. Pension funds invested in the company faced devastating losses. The empire he'd spent his life building was collapsing while he sat in a hospital room watching his son fight for life. Carl Mitchell's offer arrived next, a last-chance proposal to save the company. He would retain David as CEO, but with conditions: immediate return to work, full public commitment to the company, and most crucially, delegation of Ethan's care to appropriate professionals. The message was clear: choose business or family, not both. In his hospital room office, David reviewed the documents spread across the makeshift desk. Financial reports showed the company's imminent collapse. Legal papers detailed the consequences of his choices. Through the window, he could see Ethan sleeping, his chest rising and falling with each precious breath. James Wilson, his longtime attorney, presented the harsh reality: if you don't return immediately, you'll lose controlling interest. Everything you've built will be dismantled and sold off. Thousands will lose their jobs. He hesitated before adding, "But if you go back now, you risk losing something far more precious." The decision point came at midnight. Dr. Richardson reported complications with Ethan's treatment requiring immediate attention. Simultaneously, Patricia called the Asian markets were opening, and without David's intervention, the company would face catastrophic losses. For the first time in his life, David Lawrence couldn't control both outcomes. Memories of Sarah flooded back as he stood in the hospital corridor, torn between two worlds. She had faced a similar choice years ago: stay in David's world of wealth and power, or choose a different path for their child. Now he understood the weight of her decision with crushing clarity. The hospital chapel became his refuge as he wrestled with the choice. The empire he'd built employed thousands, supported countless families, and wielded influence that could change lives. But sitting beside him was Sarah's journal, open to her last entry: "Some fortunes can't be measured in dollars, David. Our son needs the father I always knew you could be." Mrs. Reynolds found him there at dawn, still in yesterday's clothes, Sarah's journal clutched in his hands. "Mr. Lawrence," she said softly, "the board is waiting for your decision." She paused, then added what she'd kept silent for 10 years. "Miss Sarah always said your heart was bigger than your ambition. You just needed to discover it yourself." The choice, when it finally came, felt like both an ending and a beginning. David walked into Ethan's room, took his son's small hand, and made the call that would change everything. "Patricia," he said, his voice steady, "prepare the papers for my resignation. The company's yours to save or sell. I'm exactly where I need to be." Within hours, the business world exploded with the news. "Lawrence chooses son over empire" screamed the headlines. Stock prices plummeted, triggering circuit breakers. Carl Mitchell moved in for the kill, but found something unexpected: a company transformed by its founder's final choice. The ultimate price of his decision became clear in the following days. His personal fortune, tied largely to company stock, evaporated. The mansion would have to be sold, the lifestyle he'd known abandoned. But watching Ethan's eyes light up at his permanent presence, David discovered that wealth could be measured in different ways. 1 month later, as Ethan's recovery progressed, a letter arrived from Patricia. The company had survived, restructured under her leadership, with a new mission statement inspired by David's choice: success measured in lives enriched, not just profits earned. Enclosed was a photo of the boardroom, where a plaque now hung bearing Sarah's words: "Some choices can't be undone. Choose love." The final pieces of Sarah's story emerged through an unexpected discovery. While helping Ethan organize his belongings from the hospital, David found a hidden compartment in the wooden box that had accompanied his son that rainy night. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with Sarah's distinctive handwriting, dated exactly 1 month after she disappeared. "My dearest Ethan," the first entry began, "I hope someday you'll understand why I had to leave." What followed was a detailed account of those final months: her discovery of pregnancy coinciding with the diagnosis of her illness, her desperate attempts to reach David, and the systematic way corporate machinery had kept them apart. The journal documented Ethan's early years through Sarah's eyes: first steps taken in a small Chicago apartment, first words spoken while she worked 2 jobs to support them, birthday celebrations in humble circumstances. Each milestone was marked with pressed flowers and careful observations of their growing boy's personality, all preserved for the father she hoped would someday know his son. Medical records revealed that Sarah had detected her illness early, but chose alternative treatments to save money for Ethan's future. Letters addressed to David but never sent detailed her internal struggle, wanting to reach out but fearing disruption to both their lives. Each revelation was a fresh wound, a glimpse of what might have been. Most heartbreaking were the photographs tucked between journal pages: Sarah radiant during pregnancy, despite her circumstances; Ethan's first day of school, holidays spent in modest surroundings. Their love shone through in every image, even as Sarah's health visibly declined in later photos. The final pictures, taken months before her death, showed her in a hospital bed, still managing to smile as she held their son. The most shocking discovery was a legal document dated 3 days before Sarah's death. She had meticulously planned Ethan's journey to David, including the photograph and letter. A network of trusted friends had helped execute her final wish, ensuring their son would find his way home when she could no longer care for him. Sarah's financial records told their own story of sacrifice. She had maintained a small investment account in Ethan's name, buying single shares of Lawrence Investments stock with her waitress tips, her way of keeping their son connected to his father's world. The account, though modest, represented years of careful planning for Ethan's future. Among the papers, David found evidence of Sarah's continued connection to their shared past. She'd kept his business cards from their dating years, ticket stubs from concerts they'd attended, even the napkin where he'd first written his phone number. Her devotion to these mementos spoke of a love that had never died, only transformed. The most poignant discoveries were the birthday letters she'd written to David each year, never sent but carefully preserved. They detailed Ethan's growth, his achievements, his challenges, each one documented with a mother's loving attention to detail. Reading them, David felt the weight of missed moments, first steps, first words, first days of school. Videos stored on an old USB drive showed Sarah recording messages for both David and Ethan. Even in her final weeks, her faith in their eventual reunion never wavered. Remember. She told Ethan in the last recording, "Your father's heart is bigger than his empire. When the time comes, help him remember that too." A nurse who had cared for Sarah during her final days came forward with additional journals. "She never gave up hope," the nurse explained, "that someday you'd find each other. She made me promise to keep these safe until either you came looking for answers or your son needed to understand." Sarah's last writing, completed days before her death, was a letter to both David and Ethan. Love isn't measured in dollars or days together. It's measured in the choices we make for those we care about. Ethan, help your father remember the man I fell in love with. David, show our son that some fortunes can't be counted in bank accounts. But the full scope of Sarah's journey, her courage, her sacrifices, her unwavering love for both father and son transformed their understanding of family. She had created an unbreakable connection between them, orchestrating their reunion even after her death. Her legacy wasn't just in Ethan's features or mannerisms, but in the love that had guided them both home. The cost of David's choice manifested in waves. First came the financial fallout. His resignation triggered a catastrophic drop in Lawrence Investments' stock price. The mansion would have to be sold, along with the art collection, the cars, the vacation homes. His personal fortune, once measured in billions, dwindled to mere millions as he liquidated assets to fund Ethan's ongoing treatment. The media circus intensified. Paparazzi camped outside the hospital, their cameras capturing every moment of the former Titan's new life. Headlines ranged from cruel billionaire's breakdown to sympathetic love's true price. Social media exploded with debates about wealth, responsibility, and the cost of redemption. Professional relationships crumbled like dominoes. Business associates who had once courted his favor now avoided his calls. Speaking engagements were cancelled, board positions withdrawn. The business world that had once celebrated his ruthlessness now condemned his humanity. Only Patricia remained steadfast, managing the company's transition while supporting his choice. The hospital became both sanctuary and prison. David's new routine revolved entirely around Ethan's care, physical therapy sessions, medication schedules, endless consultations with specialists. The father who once commanded global markets now focused entirely on mastering medical terminology and treatment protocols. Mrs. Reynolds watched the transformation with quiet understanding. The household staff, facing imminent unemployment, refused to leave. They took pay cuts, worked double shifts, transformed the mansion's formal rooms into comfortable spaces for Ethan's eventual return. Their loyalty proved that some things couldn't be bought with a generous salary. The Andersons surprised everyone by offering their modest home as a temporary residence once Ethan was discharged. "You'll need somewhere quiet," Martha explained. Away from the cameras, their simple generosity highlighted the stark difference between wealth and worth. The most painful cost came in moments of doubt. Late at night, watching Ethan sleep, David would question everything: his ability to be a good father, his decision to abandon the company, his right to step into a role he'd forfeited 10 years ago. Sarah's journals became his compass, her words guiding him through the darkness of uncertainty. Financial advisors painted a grim picture. The experimental treatment had depleted his liquid assets. The remaining fortune would barely cover Ethan's long-term medical needs and education. The man who once owned multiple homes would need to learn to live on a budget, to make choices based on necessity rather than luxury. The corporate world's reaction was swift and merciless. Competitors swooped in to claim his clients, partners distanced themselves from his emotional instability, and the press questioned every business decision he'd ever made. His legacy, built over decades, seemed to be unraveling in weeks. Yet amid the losses, unexpected gains emerged. Ethan's recovery accelerated with his father's constant presence. Their bond deepened beyond biology into true family. David discovered that making his son laugh brought more joy than any business victory ever had. The price of love, though steep, was proving worth every penny. The hospital staff witnessed a different kind of wealth accumulating. Cards and letters arrived daily from people touched by their story. Other parents in the pediatric ward found comfort in David's presence, his example showing that love transcended status and sacrifice brought its own rewards. The final cost assessment came from an unexpected source. Tom Mitchell, Sarah's father, visited one evening. Looking at his grandson sleeping peacefully beside his father, the older man spoke softly. "Sarah always said you had greatness in you, David. She just knew it wasn't the kind that could be measured in dollars." The transformation of David Lawrence from corporate titan to devoted father became a different kind of legacy. His choice sparked discussions about work-life balance in boardrooms across the country. Young executives began questioning the true cost of success, leading to policy changes and cultural shifts in major corporations. In the end, the price of love proved both higher and more rewarding than David could have imagined. He lost an empire but gained a family. His billions vanished, but his capacity for joy expanded. As Ethan grew stronger, David discovered that some fortunes couldn't be measured in traditional ways. They could only be counted in moments, memories, and the priceless gift of a second chance. The full scope of Sarah's lost years emerged through a series of heartbreaking discoveries. After leaving David's apartment that rainy night, she had traveled to Chicago with nothing but a small suitcase and the knowledge of her pregnancy. Hospital records showed she'd learned of her illness the same day she confirmed she was carrying Ethan, a cruel twist of fate that forced her to choose between expensive treatment and providing for their unborn child. Her early journals painted a picture of desperate determination. Working 2 jobs waitressing during the day and doing data entry at night, she managed to rent a tiny studio apartment. Each entry detailed both her growing belly and her declining health, yet her words remained focused on hope rather than bitterness. "Your father builds amazing things," she wrote to their unborn child. "Someday you'll build something even greater, bridges between hearts." Security footage from Mount Sinai, carefully preserved by a sympathetic nurse, revealed dozens of near misses. Sarah, growing visibly weaker, would time her appointments to coincide with David's board meetings, hoping for a chance encounter. One particularly poignant clip showed them passing within feet of each other, David absorbed in a phone call, while Sarah watched him from behind a pillar, one hand protectively over her pregnant belly. The financial records told a story of sacrifice that brought David to his knees. Sarah had refused expensive treatments to save money for Ethan's future. She tracked every penny, often going hungry to afford prenatal vitamins and checkups. Yet somehow, she managed to buy a single share of Lawrence Investments stock each month, her way of keeping their son connected to his father. Most devastating were the videos she recorded during Ethan's early years. Birthday celebrations in their modest apartment, first steps taken on a threadbare carpet, bedtime stories read in a voice growing progressively weaker. Through it all, Sarah maintained her practice of writing to David, documenting every milestone their son achieved. "He has your determination," she wrote, "and my heart. I pray that combination will serve him well." The final year of Sarah's life was documented with painful clarity. As her condition worsened, she began preparing Ethan for life without her. Each journal entry became more urgent, more focused on ensuring their son would find his way to David when the time was right. She created elaborate treasure hunts, teaching Ethan problem-solving skills he would later use to plan his journey to his father's door. A box of unsent letters revealed Sarah's internal struggle. She had discovered the corporate conspiracy to keep them apart, but chose not to fight it, focusing instead on protecting Ethan's future. "Some battles," she wrote, "are better won by love than by force." She detailed the systematic way David's company had blocked her attempts to reach him, yet her words contained no anger, only a deep sadness for the time they had lost. The most heartbreaking discovery was a small notebook filled with conversations with dad moments Sarah had documented where Ethan had asked about his father. She had never spoken ill of David, instead sharing stories of his kindness, his intelligence, his capacity for love. She had built a bridge between father and son long before they ever met, laying a foundation of understanding that would later prove crucial to their reunion. The lost years ended with Sarah's careful planning for Ethan's future. She had mapped out everything which foster families to trust, when to reveal certain truths, how to find his way to David. Her final letter, written days before her death, showed her unfailing faith in love's ability to heal. "Time may have separated us, but love will bring you together. Trust in that love as I always have." The collapse of Lawrence Investments sent shockwaves through Wall Street that affected far more than just stock prices. Thousands of employees watched their careers and financial security crumble as the company's value plummeted. The corporate headquarters, once bustling with energy, fell silent as entire departments faced layoffs. Retirement accounts, heavily invested in company stock, vanished overnight. Patricia fought desperately to salvage what she could. The restructuring plan she proposed meant sacrificing entire divisions to save core operations. Each meeting became a grim exercise in deciding whose jobs could be saved and whose families would face uncertain futures. The human cost of corporate ambition became painfully clear as she watched longtime employees pack their desks. International partnerships built over decades dissolved in days. Asian markets, particularly sensitive to leadership changes, pulled out entirely. European investors demanded immediate repayment of loans, forcing fire sales of valuable assets. The global empire David had carefully constructed fell apart like a house of cards, each collapse triggering another in a devastating chain reaction. The press was merciless. Business journals that had once praised David's leadership now published scathing analyses of his emotional breakdown. CNBC ran daily updates on the company's decline, each broadcast driving the stock price lower. Competitors swooped in like vultures, poaching top talent and valuable clients with promises of stability. The middle management faced impossible choices. Team leaders who had devoted their careers to Lawrence Investments now had to decide between accepting massive pay cuts or abandoning ship. The loyalty David had inspired during his tenure proved insufficient against the reality of mortgages and family obligations. The board's desperate attempts to stabilize the situation only made things worse. Their public vote of no confidence in David's leadership, intended to reassure investors, instead triggered a mass exodus of institutional investors. The company's credit rating dropped to junk status, making borrowing impossible just when capital was most needed. The human toll became evident in small, personal ways. The corporate cafeteria, once a hub of activity, served its last lunch. The daycare center that had allowed working parents to stay late closed its doors. Even the maintenance staff, some of whom had worked there for decades, received their final paychecks. Carl Mitchell's takeover, when it finally succeeded, proved more destructive than anyone anticipated. His promise to streamline operations translated into wholesale dismantling of departments. The company's charitable foundation, which had supported numerous community projects, was the first to go. Programs for employee education and development quickly followed. The corporate culture that had taken years to build dissolved into an atmosphere of fear and survival. Former colleagues became competitors for remaining positions. The values David had instilled, innovation, collaboration, ethical business practices, were replaced by a ruthless focus on short-term profits. Long-serving executives faced public humiliation as their roles in the Sarah Mitchell cover-up came to light. Jennifer Parker's confession triggered a cascade of revelations, each more damaging than the last. Careers built over decades ended in disgrace, as the full extent of corporate interference in personal lives became public knowledge. The final corporate consequence came in the form of legal action. Shareholders filed class action lawsuits, former employees demanded accountability for lost pensions, and regulatory agencies launched investigations into corporate governance. The company that David had built to last generations would barely survive its first major crisis. Yet amid the destruction, something unexpected emerged. Smaller companies, watching the collapse of Lawrence Investments, began re-examining their own cultures. Policies prioritizing profit over people were quietly revised. The human cost of corporate ambition became a cautionary tale taught in business schools, prompting a new generation of leaders to question the true price of success. The weight of lost time struck hardest during quiet moments. Late at night, watching Ethan sleep in his hospital bed, David would find himself overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they'd missed. 10 birthdays, 10 Christmases, 10 years of father-son moments that could never be reclaimed. Each milestone documented in Sarah's journals became a reminder of his involuntary absence. The Mitchells' grief took on new dimensions as they processed the truth. Tom and Mary Mitchell had lost not only their daughter but a decade with their grandson. Family dinners at the hospital became exercises in navigating complex emotions, joy at finding Ethan mixed with renewed mourning for Sarah, love for their grandson tangled with lingering anger at the circumstances that kept them apart. Ethan's own pain emerged in subtle ways. Sometimes he would wake from nightmares calling for his mother, only to find himself in a hospital room with a father he was just beginning to know. The teddy bear Sarah had given him remained his constant companion, a bridge between his past and present. His questions about why things had happened the way they did grew more complex as he began to understand the adult world that had shaped his life. The Andersons struggled with their own form of loss. Despite their joy at Ethan's reunion with his father, they mourned the future they had imagined with the boy they'd come to love as their own. Martha Anderson would sometimes pause mid-sentence when sharing stories about Ethan's time with them, caught between pride in their role in his life and awareness of the circumstances that made it necessary. Mrs. Reynolds carried her own burden of guilt. Each memory she shared of Sarah's attempts to reach David came with visible pain, the weight of silence kept too long, of choices made out of fear rather than conscience. Her dedication to caring for Ethan now seemed both penance and privilege. The hospital staff who had treated both mother and son felt the echoes of their failure to save Sarah. Dr. Richardson, in particular, struggled with the knowledge that she had treated them both in the same building, unable to connect the dots that might have changed everything. Her determination to save Ethan became almost obsessive, driven by the need to rewrite at least one ending. David's grief manifested in unexpected ways. He would find himself starting to share news with Sarah, reaching for his phone before remembering she was gone. Each new discovery about her life without him brought fresh waves of what-ifs and if-onlys. The sight of Ethan's mannerisms that mirrored his mother's could stop him mid-sentence. The hardest moments came during family therapy sessions where they attempted to process their complicated grief together. Ethan's simple questions, "Did you love Mom?" Why didn't you look for us? Required answers that balanced truth with age-appropriate understanding. Each session left them emotionally drained but somehow closer. Sarah's absence was felt most keenly during celebrations of Ethan's progress. Every medical milestone, every small victory, carried the bittersweet knowledge that she should have been there to witness it. They developed a ritual of saving a chair for her during important moments, acknowledging the space she still occupied in their hearts. The healing process revealed both strength and fragility in their newly formed family. Some days brought laughter and connection, others tears and withdrawal. They learned to give each other space when needed, to hold each other close when words failed, to honor both their grief and their growing love. The personal cost of David's transformation manifested in every aspect of his life. His carefully constructed world of wealth and power crumbled piece by piece. The mansion, with its priceless art and antiques, had to be sold to fund Ethan's ongoing treatment. His fleet of luxury cars, the private jet, the vacation homes, all liquidated to ensure his son's future. The social fallout was equally severe. Former friends, accustomed to David's lavish parties and generous favors, disappeared when he could no longer maintain the lifestyle they shared. Charity boards politely suggested he step down, citing his personal circumstances. Country club memberships quietly lapsed. The social circle that had once revolved around his wealth proved as superficial as he had always suspected. Professional relationships suffered the deepest cut. Business associates who had praised his acumen now questioned his sanity. Speaking engagements were cancelled, consulting offers withdrawn. His reputation as a brilliant strategist was replaced by whispers about emotional instability. The business world that had celebrated his ruthlessness now condemned his humanity. Physical exhaustion became a constant companion. Days spent at Ethan's bedside, nights reviewing medical reports and insurance claims, left little time for rest. The man who once commanded global markets from a corner office now dozed in hospital chairs, his designer suits replaced by wrinkled casual clothes, his once perfect appearance showing the strain of constant worry. The psychological toll was perhaps the heaviest. Each new revelation about Sarah's struggle brought fresh waves of guilt. Sleepless nights were spent reading her journals, torturing himself with the knowledge of what she'd endured alone. The weight of missed years, of choices made and paths not taken, pressed against him like a physical presence. Financial advisors painted a grim picture of his future. The experimental treatments had depleted most of his liquid assets. What remained would barely cover Ethan's long-term medical needs and education. The man who once made million-dollar decisions without blinking now found himself learning to budget, to choose between necessities rather than luxuries. The media scrutiny was relentless. Paparazzi camped outside the hospital, documenting every moment of his fall from grace. Headlines ranged from sympathetic to cruel, but all carried the underlying message that David Lawrence, the business titan, had lost his edge. His very public transformation became fodder for endless analysis and speculation. Yet amid these losses, something unexpected emerged. Mrs. Reynolds and the household staff, facing unemployment, refused severance packages to stay with the family. Former employees sent letters of support, sharing stories of times David's quiet kindness had changed their lives. Even some competitors, impressed by his choice of family over fortune, reached out with offers of help. The most personal cost came in moments of doubt. Late at night, watching Ethan sleep, David would question everything: his ability to be a good father, his decision to abandon the company, his right to step into a role he'd forfeited 10 years ago. Sarah's journals became his guide, her words helping him navigate this unfamiliar territory of prioritizing love over success. But in the end, the greatest personal cost was also his greatest gain. The loss of his empire forced David to confront who he was without the trappings of wealth and power. In choosing Ethan, he had to rediscover himself not as a billionaire CEO, but simply as a father learning to put love first. The truth exploded into public view with Jennifer Parker's televised confession. Appearing on primetime news, David's former assistant revealed a decade-long conspiracy that had systematically kept him from Sarah and their unborn child. Her hands trembling, she produced documents showing a corporate policy called Project Shield designed to protect rising executives from personal distractions that might derail their careers. The extent of the conspiracy proved staggering. Board members had not only known about Sarah's pregnancy but had actively participated in keeping her away from David. Security logs revealed dozens of times she had been turned away from the building, often while David worked just floors above. Email chains showed detailed discussions about the Sarah Mitchell situation and its potential impact on the company's upcoming IPO. The hospital's involvement added another layer of betrayal. Medical administrators, pressured by board members who sat on the hospital's funding committee, had deliberately scheduled Sarah's appointments to avoid any chance encounters with David during his frequent meetings there. Her medical records had been flagged with special instructions to maintain patient privacy, effectively isolating her even as her condition worsened. Most damning were the financial records. Corporate funds had been used to pay for surveillance of Sarah, to bribe hospital staff for information about her condition, and to ensure her grant applications to children's charities were rejected. The paper trail led straight to the highest levels of corporate leadership, revealing a systematic effort to erase Sarah from David's life. Legal documents uncovered by Detective Martinez showed how thoroughly they had covered their tracks. Sarah's will, naming David as Ethan's guardian, hadn't simply been misfiled, it had been deliberately buried under mountains of paperwork. Multiple lawyers had been involved in ensuring the document never reached family court, leading to years of unnecessary foster care for Ethan. The corporate cover-up extended beyond Sarah's lifetime. After her death, executives had monitored Ethan's whereabouts through the foster care system, using company resources to ensure he remained distant from David. Each time the boy came close to discovering his father's identity, subtle interference would result in another transfer to a different foster home. Mrs. Reynolds' testimony proved crucial. The housekeeper had kept her own detailed records, dates and times of Sarah's visits, conversations she'd overheard, changes in David's behavior. Her evidence painted a picture of deliberate manipulation that had affected every aspect of his life. Tom Mitchell, reviewing the evidence with growing horror, discovered that even his own attempts to reach David had been intercepted. Letters he'd written after Sarah's death, trying to inform David about his grandson, had been systematically destroyed. The conspiracy had effectively isolated not just Sarah, but her entire family. The final piece fell into place when a retired security guard came forward with archived surveillance footage. The tapes showed Sarah's last attempt to reach David, heavily pregnant and visibly ill, being escorted from the building while corporate executives watched from the lobby. The timestamp revealed this had happened just hours before she disappeared from New York completely. The unraveling conspiracy sent shockwaves through the business world. Companies rushed to distance themselves from similar practices, implementing new policies protecting employees' personal lives. The Sarah Mitchell Protocol became a cautionary tale taught in business ethics courses, a reminder that corporate power had human limits. The discovery came during a quiet Sunday afternoon. Mrs. Reynolds, cleaning Sarah's old room, which had remained untouched for a decade, found a hidden panel behind the antique dresser. Inside lay a small wooden box containing a USB drive and a letter dated 3 days before Sarah's death. The video began playing on David's laptop, and suddenly Sarah was there, thin and pale, but with eyes still bright with determination. "David," she began, her voice steady despite her obvious weakness, "if you're watching this, then our son has found his way to you, just as I always knew he would." What followed was a 90-minute testament of love and forgiveness that changed everything. Sarah revealed how she had discovered the corporate conspiracy during her final months, piecing together the elaborate system that had kept them apart. Rather than anger, her words carried understanding and hope. "They thought they were protecting your future," she explained, "but they didn't understand that love is the greatest fortune we can build." She detailed her careful planning for Ethan's journey, the clues she'd left, the people she'd trusted to help, the timing she'd calculated even from beyond. Every step of their son's path to David's door had been orchestrated with a mother's loving foresight. "I knew you would need each other," she said, "and that love would guide you both home." The most powerful segment addressed their shared loss. "I forgave you long ago," Sarah said, tears finally breaking through her composure, "for choices you didn't even know you were making. Now you need to forgive yourself. Be the father I always knew you could be. Show our son that true wealth isn't counted in dollars but in moments of love." Sarah had recorded separate messages for different milestones in Ethan's life: his first day of high school, his graduation, his wedding. Each video showed her growing weaker, but her love growing stronger. The final recording, labeled "When He's Ready," contained her deepest hopes for their son's future. Included with the videos were letters to everyone involved: the Andersons, thanking them for their love; Mrs. Reynolds, absolving her of guilt; even Jennifer Parker, offering forgiveness for her role in the separation. Sarah's capacity for grace in the face of betrayal proved astounding. The most precious contents were her private moments with Ethan, bedtime stories recorded for future nights, life advice shared with gentle wisdom, memories preserved in her increasingly fragile voice. She had created a bridge across time, ensuring her love would continue guiding both father and son. A separate message for David contained practical guidance: Ethan's favorite foods, his fears and dreams, the ways he showed love without words. Sarah had documented everything a father might need to know, turning her terminal diagnosis into an opportunity to connect them even in her absence. The final video, recorded just hours before her death, showed Sarah at her most vulnerable yet most powerful. "Love isn't bound by time or distance," she whispered, her voice weak but her eyes clear. "It finds its way home, just as our son found his way to you. Remember that some fortunes are built not in boardrooms, but in the quiet moments between hearts." The path to redemption started in small ways. David's transformation from corporate titan to devoted father caught public attention, but it was the quiet moments that truly marked the change. Local newspapers began reporting stories of former employees coming forward with accounts of his unpublicized kindness: college tuitions quietly paid, medical bills covered, small businesses saved. The revelation of the corporate conspiracy shifted public opinion dramatically. David's choice to abandon his empire for his son was no longer seen as a breakdown but as a triumph of human spirit over corporate greed. Business journals that had criticized his decision now ran feature stories about ethical leadership and the true meaning of success. Sarah's family led the way in public forgiveness. Tom Mitchell's televised statement touched hearts nationwide: "We lost our daughter to corporate ambition, but we've gained back our grandson and found the man our Sarah always believed in." Sometimes love takes the longest road home. And their public embrace of David helped heal not just their family, but inspired others to examine their own capacity for forgiveness. The Andersons' role in the story added another layer of redemption. Rather than fight for custody, they became partners in Ethan's care. Martha Anderson's simple statement, "Love multiplies, it doesn't divide," became a touchstone for modern family dynamics. Their inclusion in Ethan's life showed how redemption could extend beyond traditional family boundaries. Hospital staff who had unknowingly participated in keeping Sarah and David apart found their own path to redemption. Led by Dr. Richardson, they established the Sarah Mitchell Foundation, providing support for single parents facing medical crises. The program ensured that no other parent would have to choose between treatment and their child's future. Mrs. Reynolds transformed from a guilt-ridden housekeeper into a fierce advocate for corporate responsibility. Her testimony before business ethics committees helped shape new policies protecting employees' personal lives. The woman who had once kept silent out of fear now spoke with authority about the human cost of corporate interference. David's own redemption came through actions rather than words. He sold his remaining assets to establish a trust for children in foster care, ensuring they would have the medical care Sarah couldn't afford. The man who had once measured success in billions now found fulfillment in helping other families stay together. The media narrative shifted from scandal to inspiration. Stories emerged of other executives choosing family over fortune, of companies rewriting policies to protect personal relationships, of lives changed by the example of love's triumph over ambition. David and Ethan's story became a catalyst for corporate culture change. Even Jennifer Parker found a path to redemption. Her public confession led to a movement within corporate America examining the human cost of success. She dedicated her considerable organizational skills to helping other whistleblowers expose similar practices, turning her expertise from concealment to revelation. The most powerful redemption came in the quiet moments between father and son. Each shared meal, each homework session, each midnight conversation about Sarah built a bridge between past and future. They learned together that redemption wasn't a single moment, but a daily choice to love and remember. Sarah's legacy bloomed in unexpected ways. The Sarah Mitchell Foundation, started with the remnants of David's fortune, grew into a powerful force for change. It focused on 3 areas she had held dear: supporting single parents facing medical crises, protecting children in the foster system, and promoting ethical corporate practices that put families first. The Foundation's first major initiative, Sarah's Promise, ensured that no parent would have to choose between medical treatment and their child's future. Working with major hospitals nationwide, the program provided comprehensive support from medical care to housing assistance. Each case was handled with the personal attention Sarah had never received. Ethan's recovery became a symbol of hope for other families. His story inspired a network of support groups for children in medical crisis, emphasizing the importance of both physical and emotional healing. The boy who had once felt lost in the foster system now helped others find their way home, sharing his mother's belief in the power of love to bridge any distance. The Mitchell-Lawrence Family Center opened in the building that had once housed Sarah's nonprofit. It offered legal assistance to families separated by corporate policies, counseling for children in transition, and advocacy for workers' rights. The waiting room displayed Sarah's favorite quote, "Some fortunes are built in hearts, not boardrooms." David's transformation influenced corporate culture far beyond his former company. Business schools added the Sarah Mitchell case to their ethics curriculum, examining how the pursuit of profit had nearly destroyed 3 lives. CEOs began publicly prioritizing family-friendly policies, citing the Lawrence story as a watershed moment in business history. Mrs. Reynolds, once a silent witness to corporate cruelty, became a respected speaker on ethical business practices. Her simple testimony, "I watched love die by 1,000 paper cuts," sparked a movement examining how small compromises could lead to profound human cost. The household staff's loyalty became legendary in discussions of true wealth versus mere riches. The Andersons' role evolved into something beautiful and unexpected. Their modest home became a gathering place for an extended family united by love rather than blood. Sunday dinners brought together the Mitchells, David, Ethan, and various friends and supporters, creating the kind of warm family environment Sarah had always dreamed of for her son. Sarah's journals, published with the family's blessing, became bestsellers not as a scandal expose but as a testament to enduring love. Her words touched millions, inspiring other parents to document their journeys for their children. The royalties funded scholarships for medical students committed to compassionate care. The hospital wing where both Sarah and Ethan had received treatment was renamed the Sarah Mitchell Center for Family Healing. Dr. Richardson ensured that every staff member knew Sarah's story, making emotional support and family unity central to patient care. Pictures of mother and son hung in the entrance, reminding visitors that healing involved both body and heart. Perhaps the most profound legacy was the quiet revolution in corporate America. Companies began implementing Sarah's law policies explicitly protecting employees' personal lives and family relationships. The corporate world that had once conspired to separate a family now championed the balance between success and love. The new chapter of their lives began in the most ordinary way. Having sold the mansion, David and Ethan moved into a modest brownstone in Chelsea, the same neighborhood where he and Sarah had once shared their first apartment. The front room became Ethan's study space, filled with books and science projects, while the small backyard transformed into their personal workshop for fixing things together. Morning routines took on a sacred quality. David learned to make perfect pancakes, adding chocolate chips in the shapes of mathematical symbols that made Ethan laugh. They would solve puzzles over breakfast, sharing sections of the newspaper just as Sarah had described in her journals. These quiet moments, once impossible in David's corporate life, became the foundation of their new reality. The Mitchells lived close by, their presence helping fill the void Sarah had left. Sunday dinners became a family tradition, with Tom teaching Ethan woodworking, while Mary shared stories about Sarah's childhood. The dining room walls slowly filled with family photos, old ones of Sarah, new ones of their growing family, bridging past and present with love and memory. Mrs. Reynolds and key staff members refused to leave, taking reduced salaries to stay with the family. The former housekeeper became more grandmother than employee, her loving presence helping both father and son navigate their new life. The household that had once run with corporate efficiency now operated on love and shared purpose. The Andersons remained vital parts of their extended family, visiting regularly and maintaining Ethan's connection to his time in their care. Martha Anderson's teaching background proved invaluable as Ethan transitioned to a new school, while Robert's practical skills complemented David's growing interest in hands-on projects with his son. David found unexpected fulfillment in his new role as a full-time father. His business acumen transformed into helping Ethan with math homework, his negotiation skills now deployed in parent-teacher conferences. The man who had once commanded boardrooms discovered greater joy in commanding sandcastle operations in their small backyard. The Brownstones' garage became their sanctuary. Together they restored old radios and small engines, David teaching Ethan the skills his own father had taught him. These projects became metaphors for their own journey, taking broken things and making them whole again, finding beauty in the process of repair. Community replaced corporate power in David's life. He became known in the neighborhood not as a former billionaire but as Ethan's dad, the man who helped coach Little League despite knowing nothing about baseball, who organized science fairs at the local school, who always had time to help a neighbor fix a broken appliance. Their home filled with evidence of their shared interests. Model airplanes hung from Ethan's ceiling, each one built together during his recovery. Sarah's books lined the shelves alongside David's engineering manuals, while Ethan's artwork and academic achievements covered the refrigerator. It wasn't the showcase the mansion had been, but it was undeniably a home. Most importantly, they built new traditions while honoring Sarah's memory. Each birthday included reading one of her sealed letters. Holiday celebrations combined David's formal dinners with the casual warmth Ethan had known with the Andersons. They created a family tapestry woven from threads of past and present loss and love, ending and beginning. The moment of complete healing came unexpectedly, during a routine checkup at Mount Sinai. Dr. Richardson reviewed Ethan's latest tests, her face breaking into a genuine smile. "His heart is perfect," she announced, tears in her eyes. "The treatment worked better than we could have hoped." David pulled his son close, both of them understanding that they had overcome not just a medical condition, but the legacy of loss that had haunted their family. Emotional healing proved equally profound. During family therapy sessions, Ethan began speaking more openly about his feelings about Sarah, about his time in foster care, about finding his father. The wall of protective silence he had built around his heart gradually dissolved, replaced by a child's natural ability to express both joy and sorrow freely. The Mitchells found their own peace, watching their grandson thrive under David's care. The bitterness they had carried for years transformed into appreciation for the man their daughter had loved. Tom Mitchell, who had once blamed David for Sarah's death, now spent weekends teaching both father and son the woodworking skills Sarah had loved to watch. David's healing manifested in his ability to share Sarah's memory without pain. He learned to tell Ethan stories about their college days, their early romance, the small moments that had made their love special. These stories became bridges between past and present, helping Ethan understand both his parents' love story and his own place in it. The Andersons found unexpected healing in their new role as extended family. Rather than losing Ethan, they gained a larger family circle. Their love for him expanded to include David, creating relationships that transcended traditional boundaries. Martha Anderson's famous Sunday roasts became a symbol of their blended family strength. Mrs. Reynolds released her burden of guilt through action, channeling her energy into creating a warm, loving environment for Ethan. Her dedication to the family's well-being became not penance but purpose. Her presence a testament to love's power to heal even the deepest wounds. Professional healing came through David's work with the foundation. His business skills, once used to build corporate empires, now served to help other families facing medical crises. Each family helped, each child saved, brought him closer to the man Sarah had always believed he could be. The community around them witnessed and supported their healing journey. Neighbors who had initially gawked at the billionaire's fall now saw only a devoted father and his thriving son. The media narrative shifted from scandal to celebration as their story inspired others to prioritize love over ambition. Physical healing showed in small ways. Ethan's energy returned full force, allowing him to join sports teams and play without restriction. David's stress-lined face softened, the weight of corporate pressure replaced by the lighter burden of ordinary parental concerns. Even their home seemed to heal, transforming from a new space into a true sanctuary. The final piece of healing came through forgiveness, not just of others, but of themselves. Ethan learned to forgive himself for the times he had been angry at his mother's absence. David found peace with his past choices, understanding that redemption didn't require perfection, only love and commitment to change. The Sarah Mitchell Foundation exceeded all expectations, growing from a personal mission into a nationwide force for change. Its success lay not in the millions of dollars raised, but in the thousands of families helped. Each case was handled with personal attention, ensuring that no other parent would face the impossible choices Sarah had confronted. Ethan's academic achievements reflected both his father's intelligence and his mother's compassion. His science project on affordable heart monitoring devices won national recognition, inspired by his own medical journey. Universities began courting him early, impressed not just by his grades but by his commitment to combining medical innovation with social responsibility. David found a new calling as a mentor to young entrepreneurs, teaching them to balance ambition with humanity. His lectures at business schools weren't about maximizing profits, but about building companies that enriched communities. The man who had once epitomized corporate success now championed a new definition of wealth. The brownstone became a hub of activity and innovation. The garage workshop, where father and son still tinkered with old machines, spawned several patents for medical devices designed to be both effective and affordable. Their shared love of fixing things evolved into creating solutions for others. The extended family flourished in unexpected ways. Tom Mitchell's woodworking hobby transformed into a successful small business, creating custom furniture for children's hospitals. The Andersons' modest home became a weekend gathering place where business leaders and foster families shared meals and perspectives. Mrs. Reynolds wrote a best-selling cookbook combining Sarah's recipes with stories of love and redemption. Educational initiatives sponsored by the foundation created opportunities for other children from challenging backgrounds. Scholarships in Sarah's name helped medical students committed to compassionate care, while engineering grants funded innovations in affordable health care. Her vision of helping others lived on through these programs. The annual Sarah Mitchell Memorial Benefit evolved from a simple fundraiser into a celebration of family and community. Rather than the formal galas David had once hosted, These events featured children's artwork, family activities, and stories of lives changed through the foundation's work. Success was measured not in dollars raised, but in families helped. Ethan's interest in medicine and engineering pointed toward a future combining his father's business acumen with his mother's dedication to helping others. His summer internships at children's hospitals showed him following Sarah's footsteps while forging his own path. David watched with pride as his son developed into the bridge between wealth and compassion that Sarah had envisioned. The Foundation's research division, led by Dr. Richardson, made breakthrough discoveries in treating childhood heart conditions. Each advance was shared freely with other institutions, creating a network of care that prioritized healing over profit. The corporate world that had once separated a family now worked to keep others together. Most promising was the change in corporate culture their story inspired. Companies began measuring success not just in profits but in families supported, communities strengthened, and lives improved. The future they built together proved that true wealth could multiply through sharing, and that love was the greatest investment of all. On Ethan's 16th birthday, they opened the last sealed letter from Sarah, marked "When Love Has Won." Her words, written a decade earlier, seem to bridge time itself to my two loves. If you're reading this, then the miracle I prayed for has happened. You found each other, and more importantly, you found what truly matters. The letter continued through their tears. David, you've learned what I always knew, that your heart was bigger than any empire you could build. Ethan, you've shown the courage I hoped you'd inherit from both of us. Together you've proven that love can heal any wound, bridge any distance, and build the truest kind of wealth. Sarah's final message wasn't about loss or regret, but about the power of love to transform lives. She had foreseen not just their reunion, but their potential to change the world through their journey. Her words celebrated not what they had lost, but what they had found in each other. The living room of their Chelsea brownstone held a different kind of wealth now. Photos chronicled their journey, Ethan's medical recovery, family gatherings with the Mitchells and Andersons, foundation events helping other families. Sarah's presence lived on in these images, in the love that had guided them home to each other. David's response to the letter became the Foundation's new mission statement: true wealth isn't measured in dollars but in lives touched, hearts healed, and love shared. The corporate world that had once prioritized profits now studied their story as a model for ethical success, proving that compassion and commerce could coexist. The message spread beyond their immediate circle. Other families facing similar challenges found hope in their story. Business leaders reconsidered their priorities. The wealth they had created wasn't counted in bank accounts, but in the growing network of people choosing love over ambition, family over fortune. Ethan's own words, spoken at a foundation event, captured their journey's essence. My mother's greatest gift wasn't the path she laid for us to find each other. It was showing us that love is the most powerful force for change. When we choose love, we choose to be truly rich. Mrs. Reynolds, who had witnessed their entire journey, put it simply: Miss Sarah knew that real wealth walks on two legs and sees with its heart. Everything else is just numbers on paper. Her wisdom, born from years of watching love triumph over loss, became part of their family philosophy. The final message wasn't just about their family, but about the possibility of redemption through love. Their story proved that it's never too late to choose differently, to prioritize what truly matters, to build wealth that enriches the soul rather than just the bank account. Sarah's last written words became their family motto, engraved both in their hearts and on the Foundation's wall: love is the greatest fortune we can build, the truest legacy we can leave, and the only wealth that grows by being shared. Build that kind of wealth, and you'll never be poor. If this story of love, redemption, and the true meaning of wealth has touched your heart, please take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your experiences and reflections could inspire others facing similar challenges. Support our storytelling mission by subscribing to our channel and joining our community of believers in the power of love over fortune. Every subscription helps us continue bringing these moving stories to light. Share this video with friends and family who might need a reminder that it's never too late to choose love over ambition, that true wealth isn't measured in dollars but in moments shared and lives touched. Don't forget to hit the like button below. Your single click shows that stories of hope and redemption still matter in today's world. Together we can spread the message that love is the greatest fortune we can build.